It's doing stuff?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Let's see what happens. And so it's on my Facebook page?
Yep.
All right.
It's on your Facebook page right now.
Well, you can send everyone over, and we can actually start signing stuff. I'm actually gonna just start because I'm gonna get my. I need a little piece of paper because these things have the nibs on them. So like just a Post-it or something.
Stays in place.
Thanks.
Yep.
Alright, so 1, 2.
I think it's just...
Ooh.
Well, how about I give you your first question, Brandon?
Well, let's just wait. Let's give
you want to wait until
people
we
a
get
second.
people here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's get people here. Let's give them a chance to come over and to complain about having to be on Facebook. You guys are fine if you end up being heard on the stream. This is casual. So how yeah. How much is visible, Adam?
Not much.
Not much?
So a little outside your shoulders. We can move it back if you want.
Just curious.
I was expecting to be able to film in landscape, and it wouldn't let me.
John scooted in a little bit.
I'll move him in so people can have a glance at him. You're okay. Don't worry.
He's in there now.
There you are. Magellan loves pens and he loves Sharpies. But he's really good at getting the caps off the Sharpies, which would be slightly only less messy than my children having a Sharpie with a cap off of it. And so I give him the pens instead. Yeah, you almost got the lip. Yeah, you've almost got it off. Thank you guys for coming to the stream. I will actually be talking in a bit. We're just waiting for people to get here and things like this. If you haven't seen one of these before, this is a signature. Not a signature that I sign. What are you doing? Yeah? Not a signature of the type that I sign, a signature of a book, which you're okay, what are you doing? You can't eat my glasses. These are cut and trimmed and bound into the book in little signatures. And so we had problems with the leather bounds in that they used to come really nicely wrapped and in a box, and were really well protected, but then we needed to take all of that off and sign them and then ship them to people. And so we ended up having a whole lot of them be damaged. So they were trying this way now, where we sign them. Come on, what are you doing? No, don't eat my glasses. Don't eat my glasses. Where we sign big stacks of them, have them bounded, and then when we ship them out, they come in the nice boxes with the shrink wrap and stuff like that. Come on, come on, come on. You don't. Come on. And so, theoretically, they'll come in better shape. Come on, get back on your perch. Or on my head, that works too. Come on. Where's your pen? Oh, you got the lid, the front off, and so you're not interested in it anymore? Eat the back. No? Once you broke it, you don't care anymore. We're just going to wait for a little bit for a few more people to get here. We are in the basement of Cosmere House, which is where the offices for most of my team are. It's actually the house next door. We got fortunate in the people who live next to us, who we actually really liked. But they were thinking of moving, and so instead we came up with buying this house and putting everyone's offices in here instead of in our basement, which I think you guys are happier being over here as opposed to in our basement. And I now work in our basement. You can't eat the way of King's pages, Magellan. No. They are not for bird consumption. People are going to buy these, theoretically, at a Kickstarter. How many people have come over, Adam? Are we
have 300 likes, but it says only 17 are watching.
17
right now.
watching? Okay.
I updated it just now to all your social media.
Okay.
And since
And you were able to go post on the YouTube thing or whatever?
It's over 1,000 right now. This is not telling me accurate things.
So why don't you start throwing some questions at me? Yeah. Hello. He only says hello. We're working on that. You're going to have to go back on the ISR on. Yeah. You're going to have to go back on the ISR.
So this first one is from our good friend Deanna Whitney.
Okay.
She has a food-related
question.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
She says, I'm working on a food article about Rochar. So a few questions.
Yep.
Lavis equals corn.
What's that? Lavis
She says Lavis equals corn.
Yeah,
Okay.
ish. That would be a nice...
I think she got that one from Karen.
Yeah.
And then she says, is one of the other grains like buckwheat? Do they have bananas or a similar tasting fruit? And what is the earth equivalent of the most popular vegetable in a Lethe cuisine?
Probably a sweet potato, though I hate them, would be the closest thing to the tuber that they use. There is a somewhat buckwheat-ish grain, but most of like the Thalen bread that they talk about and stuff, you're going to be getting wheat in from Shinovar, and so. But yes, they have a grain that's slightly more of the consistency, so that if you saw it, you'd be, or if you ate something from it, you'd be like, oh, this is some weird form of wheat. They're forming the flatbreads out of it, and so. I'd have to go to my notes and find out which one it is. I know I've mentioned it in the books before, so if you go look around, if I didn't end up mentioning it, I've got it in the wiki, and so you can drop us an email and I can pull it out of the wiki for you.
Okay. She's also hoping that they have garlic.
They have things similar enough to garlic that you could just use garlic.
Perfect. This one comes from Twitter, from Gordon Hawkins.
Mm-hmm.
He says, how often do you look at a published book and think of something you would have liked to do better? Is there anything specific?
So this happens a lot. And it's less that the book did it wrong. That's not what I'm usually thinking. Once in a while I am. That happens more often with films where I feel like they end up cheating at one point or something like that. But a lot of times I'll read a book and say, man, it would be really cool if X happened. And then the author does something that is not X, and it's still very cool for their story. But I'm left thinking, well, since they didn't do it, I actually kind of get excited when they don't, because that means I can do it. The most obvious example of this is Mistborn, right? Where the premise comes from, what if the hero who was prophesied to save the world failed, right? This came directly from reading the Harry Potter books and thinking about all the epic fantasies that I loved when I was growing up and still love. But it still happens quite a bit today. Let's see, can I think of a recent one? What have I been working on recently? So, is there anything from Oathbringer that this happened with, where I thought, oh, I could do that? It happened with Skyward, right? Like, Skyward, I'm not sure if I can point to a specific example, kind of comes out of the mix of things like How to Train Your Dragon, and a little bit Top Gun, and stuff like that. And I remember I think I was even in one of the How to Train Your Dragon films, and watching it and thinking along the lines of, what happens if it doesn't go well, if the character doesn't, manage to learn how to do this, like where does it go? Where does it go if the story breaks? And when the story breaks, that's exciting. And that lends me to all kinds of spirals in my head of how could you break a story but still have it work? And I find that exciting. What? You bored already? We got like 2 hours of this. You can't be bored already. Yeah? He's going to come beg for scratches. So if anyone... what? Yeah? They're basically... Macaws are basically... flying velociraptors, right? Tame flying velociraptors. This is what happened to dinosaurs, is they became this thing. Now that I'm a bird person, watching something like Jurassic Park where they're very scared of the velociraptors, I'm like, a few good scritches on the head, and that raptor probably would be just fine. If not that, then a walnut or two. Yes. You going to speak for them? You going to say hello? Hello? No? You're not going to talk today? He wants to eat the camera is what he wants to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what are you doing? You're trying to get down and eat the pages. I'm going to put him up here for a little bit. We've got this this coat hanger that we call the Eye of Sauron. I suppose Adam can show it to you guys. And he really likes going up on it and things like that. If you have a parrot, highly recommend buying an $18 metal clothes hanger because they become very, very good parrot jungle gyms. And they do like being up high, and it does look like the Eye of Sauron, so that's a plus.
So, this next one is a bit of a writing advice question.
Okay.
It says, how would someone on a different continent get around to getting published in America?
It does happen. It's not common, but it does happen. The thing is, it's going to be a lot harder for you to network, but the fortunate thing is networking, the in-person networking isn't as important as it used to be when I broke in, just because the prevalence of social media and the internet and things like that. So you basically have two primary routes if you want to be traditionally published in New York. You still have the basic, I'm going to start submitting books to editors sort of thing and to agents, and you're going to go through that whole situation. And it's frustrating, it's annoying, it's slow, queries suck, no one likes queries, not even the people who get them. I don't know why we use them, but the other process would be to self-publish some of your early works and get a following, and if you then decide you want to go traditional and you have already a following, it kind of puts you in a position of power because you already have your own following, your own readers, and you can judge if a traditional publishing contract is going to actually be a better deal for you or not. Both have their advantages. If the idea of self-publishing, of going and being an indie author and having to do all of this stuff yourself is just not interesting to you at all, traditional publishing still can provide a lot of stuff for a new author. But at the same time, because indie publishing is just open to anyone, you can do it wherever you are, which is really handy and really nice. If you can make it to like a Worldcon when it comes to your area, which they do move around, it's in New Zealand next year, there's going to be a higher than normal percentage of editors and agents there, and a higher than normal percentage chance than other conventions and things of you being able to meet them or at least listen to them, sit on panels and things like that. Sending blind is annoying, but you still can, from another country, do your research on the publishing houses. Do your research and find out who the editors are at the publishing houses. You can find out the names of agents and who works at the agency. You can find out new books that they have bought and published recently, and read those books and find out, you know, why. And you can still read a lot of these people's blogs and stuff. And so when you submit to them, instead of saying, "Dear Acquisitions Editor," you can still say, "Hey, you know, I've followed your blog. I've read this new author that you published. You know, be honest, make sure it's someone you actually like and it's an editor that's a good match for you. Say, I read this new author. I thought, you know, this was really a great book, and I have something to offer, and here is my pitch on my book." It'll just give you a little bit of a personal connection. It'll just be a little bit better. But it is a little harder. You could maybe talk to Steven Erickson if you can ever find him at a convention or doing a chat or something. He's a Canadian author who published in the UK first. So I could be wrong on that, but that's what I think is the case. So, you know, it does happen that people publish with publishers from another country. It does happen.
So this one's from Redditor Cyrus the Not Too Bad.
Cyrus the Not Too Bad, hey. Yeah, I like that username.
Yeah, made me chuckle.
Yeah.
He said, "Hi, Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
You are known for being extremely meticulous in planning out the structure and details of your stories before writing. That being said, are there any times you have come up with a new idea or plot point as you are writing and just went with it?"
Yeah, it happens all the time. So I am, as I've come to learn, relatively detailed in my outlines compared to a lot of my contemporaries. I'm not the most detailed. I think that prize probably goes to Kevin J. Anderson. His outlines tend to be just basically the book, but shorter. If you've seen me talk about my outlines, there are a lot of bullet points in there and goals and things like that. I don't know exactly what's going to happen in each chapter. I'll know what I want to achieve in each chapter, which is a little bit different, right? I'll know, you know, these two characters need to interact, this information needs to come out, and this, you know, event happens to end the chapter. I'll know things like that. However, as I'm writing, as you're putting the book together, as you're getting in the zone and really coming to understand how the book is feeling and flowing, you start to change things just from the first chapter. Not even it comes out exactly like planned most of the time. And this is just a part of the process. Now, I am an outliner, which means that when one of these things happens, I will often go with it, but I'll also be revising my outline. I'll take a little bit of time to just go with it and see how it goes often. But a lot of times I'm already working on my outline. I'm already saying, oh, this is a much better idea. This is working way better. Trying to remember from a first book, a time where that happened. Famously, you know, Adolin wasn't a viewpoint character in the original draft of The Way of Kings, but that didn't happen during the drafting. That was during the revision process, so it's not quite what you're asking. The personality that Doomslug ended up having in Skyward was not something I had planned out. I just kind of went with it as it came along, as I was writing. A lot of the personalities of the side characters in Skyward are a good example of this. Even Jorgen's personality is quite different from what I had imagined in the outline. This happens a lot with characters for me that I'm writing, and who they are becoming is a much different person than who I maybe imagine them. Until I write through their eyes, I'm not 100% sure who they are. And this is the big thing that throws my outlines off, right? Is I know that my characters are going to grow to become different people than I imagined when I started. And the outline just has to adapt to that. Unless it goes too far. I will say some of my fans who were watching back in the time, I added a character to Warbreaker just kind of on the fly as I was working on the beginning. And I really liked this character. They were great. And so I'm like, wow, I want to bring this character on the adventure. And the character, you know, I wrote them into a couple of chapters because they were just fun to write. And it just ruined the other chapters. The chapters no longer worked in the structure I was making, and it was a worse structure. And this character being along was taking away from the sense of isolation, which was a major theme for Syria in that book. And I was posting these chapters online as I wrote them for Warbreaker. I just eventually said, this character is no longer coming on the adventure, and pretended they hadn't been there in the next chapter I posted. That happens sometimes too, where you just decide to edit something down. What, you want to come back? You're going to come bother me. You got to play. We got 2 hours of this, Magellan. So, there you go.
So this one comes from Mario Zakal.
Uh-huh.
He says, I'm curious about your biggest inspirations and teachers when it comes to writing craft, like David Farland.
Yep.
And what some of the best lessons were that improved your writing a whole lot.
Oh man, what a great question. While I'm doing this, wouldn't you guys get me some water, like maybe in a water bottle, so that I won't spill
Lots of ice.
Yeah. So let's go down some of the people that I learned from. So Dave has all kinds of fantastic lessons. It's going to be really hard for me to pick just one because, you know, the class I took from Dave was really instrumental. Oh, he just wants to perch on my arm so he can reach his toy easier. What? So one of the things Dave talked about was how great mixing of characters is often like braiding two roses together. That what you want to have is characters who have a lot of thorns on them, that they're prickly, right? They've got flaws, they've got problems, like people do. And when you're making a relationship plot, it works really well if you can braid those thorns so that the thorns get pointed outward, not toward the other person. And this metaphor means that these two characters go really well together because their thorns interweave and then become a barrier protecting them from the other things that might try to come in and get them, right? It's just a beautiful metaphor of what makes a relationship work. But he also talked about the idea of how important it is to reinforce with foreshadowing multiple times. He's where I got the phrase "try fail cycle," stuff like that. There's just a ton I learned from Dave. So if you guys get a chance to take a class from Dave, he knows so much. I would also count Robert Jordan in that, though I never met him. I did study his writing quite a bit when I was trying to break in, because he was one of the more influential writers upon me. And the thing I would say I learned from Robert Jordan was really use of viewpoint. How I see through a character's eyes is just very influenced by the way that Robert Jordan would write, the way his characters saw the world. And I love how when you're in a character's head in a Wheel of Time book, you can just tell whose head you're in from just a few paragraphs by the way they describe the world. And that's what I aspire to be able to do. That you can pick a random scene somewhere in one of my books, and you can read 2 or 3 paragraphs with all the name and specifically identifying information pulled out, but you will just be able to tell whose viewpoint you're in because of the way they see the world. And that's great. Robert Jordan is really a master of that. Let's see. I learned a lot about discovery writing just by reading things that Stephen King wrote about the process. And he does things so differently from the way that I do them that I find his process fascinating. And the more that I've written, the more I realize that every writer is a discovery writer at heart. This is a person that, like I use an outline, but I still have to discovery write, meaning have no outline between points on my outline. Like books are improvisation. I may do a little more work up front, but there's still a lot of improv in the book, and so listening to discovery writers talk about how they make connections and how they will design things and how they will write their stories so the characters feel nice and alive and real. That's always really interesting to me, and I hope to be able to take the best of that and the best of outlining and make my own style out of that. Yeah.
So the next one is from Twitter, from El Sombrero de Wayne.
Hey, that's a great Twitter handle.
Not quite the Twitter handle, but that's what the name was.
Okay.
So, they said, what do you feel about having created the best fantasy character ever, talking about Stick?
Oh, Stick. Okay, not Wayne. Well, you know, I didn't choose to put the Stick in my book. The Stick chose to allow me to express Stick's radiance through the story that I was writing. It's actually really a funny thing. Like, I don't know that I would have been able to pick ahead of time that Stick would become my Narg. For those who don't read Wheel of Time, there's a talking Trolloc named Narg in the first book. Thank you very much, man.
No trouble.
And this talking Trolloc became the great Wheel of Time meme long before, you know, memes were even a thing we talked about, you know. And I didn't know the Stick would become the meme that it became. I certainly fueled it when I did an interlude from the Stick's viewpoint, so I am partially to blame for that. I'm just glad the meme didn't become when Dan Wells, my writer buddy, he did a April Fool's joke one year when I was not well known as a writer. It was like after I had like 3 books out or something like that. And it was a fake movie announcement about the movie rights to Mistborn being bought and made. And he came up with the most ridiculous actors for this thing and put it on the internet. And for years, I got emails from people saying, I can't believe you chose Paris Hilton to play Vin and stuff like this. Like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, Dan, they did not get the /S on that, and I have to say this is an April Fool's joke. So, and I don't blame people. I mean, you know, there are certainly April Fool's jokes I have taken as fact before, and maybe not read as closely as I should have. So, yeah.
This one from Instagram, from Jazzy Condra.
Jazzy Condra, ooh.
They say, so I've been wondering about Cosmere holidays, feast days for a while, specifically for Mistborn. They're wondering, does Arrow 2 Scadrial have a Christmas-like or Easter-like holiday, and is it called Merrimas?
No, they... this is something I think about and then don't have as much time ever to work in as I want to. They have quite a few holidays and feast days in Era 2 Mistborn, partially because Era 2 Mistborn was founded by a bunch of people who didn't get a lot of holidays during their life and then suffered through quite a bit in their lives and then found themselves in a situation where perhaps hard manual labor, while important, was not as necessary as it might be in some other situations. So yeah, there are quite a bit. They are good at taking time off. Probably the best of all of the cultures depicted in a book. I don't know. They're gonna have a lot of of feast days on Nulthus also. But yes. But I would have to go to my notes. I'll try to do a better job of getting more of those in the books, because it's a place that I feel like I don't do enough. I don't talk enough about, like, sports. I don't talk enough about feast days. Everything, you know, is about the plots. It's okay. Yeah. Of the stories. And sometimes I wonder this just presents an inaccurate representation of the society. But of course, when our viewpoint character is someone like Wax, who looks askance at holidays, then I get a little bit more leeway on that. So how many is that done? That's 200 done?
We didn't count them when we started them up.
Yeah. We got, what, we've got like 6,000 of these left?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we can just count how many bundles, find out how many bundles there are. and we can tell people how far along. We probably won't stream the whole thing, but we can see how far I am from being done with all of this. So, what are we doing?
He's got twine around his neck.
Oh, okay. Oh, he does that sometimes.
It'll be alright.
Yeah, no, I'll help you. No. Come on. Yeah. No, I'll get it, Joe. I'll get it. I'll get it. Come on. You're okay. Look, you need to be better about that.
Do you want me to cut that loop?
Yeah, why don't you cut that loop? You're okay. He just got a little bit of twine around his neck. Not too tightly, but what? Yes. You're okay.
You've done 1 of 37 stacks.
1 of 37 stacks. What do you need?
So, whenever you're ready for the next one?
Yeah, you can give me the next one. He's just a little freaked out, and so he will need to be scratched for a minute to
No worries.
get unfreaked out a little bit.
So this one is Redditor JockDoc82. Says, what author needs to be, in quotes, discovered that authors, editors, etc. in the industry know about, but for whatever reason the fan base hasn't yet discovered them?
I mean,
It's a hard
for years I would say Nora, but Nora has really taken off with her last series. That's N.K. Jemisin. But my go-to about this is probably still Guy Gavriel Kay, right? I am surprised at how few people know who Guy Kay is, when he is one of the greatest fantasy authors who's ever lived. Taigana, Lions of Al-Rasan, and even his modern stuff, like I Loved Under Heaven and things like this. Like, he is just an amazing writer. He's gotten more and more literary as his career has progressed, so it depends on what you like regarding literary fiction. But, I mean, this is the guy who put together the Silmarillion with Christopher Tolkien, right? He's Christopher Tolkien's friend in college, and has had just an amazing career of fantastic books, and just not well known as much as he should. His older stuff is all of it reads a little slow. It doesn't read like a Brent Weeks book or a Jim Butcher book. It reads more a little bit like a Tad Williams book, but just beautiful and well written and fantastic writing. And I'm always surprised at how few people these days know Jane Yolen. She's a Sifwa Grandmaster. She's one of my favorite writers. She released a short story collection that I just couldn't stop talking about a couple years back, called The Emerald Circus. She's just a fantastic writer also. And these are both, kind of masters from the generation when I was growing up, who have stood the test of time and whose books are just wonderful. Other than that, I'm not sure if I can pick out any, because it seems like fandom tends to be a little bit better at finding the new authors than I am. I do read them, but I read a lot of my student work for new authors and things, and while they are all great, it's too early in their careers to say if they are undiscovered or not. So, this is right here. This is why I'm not scared of velociraptors in Jurassic Park movies, because this is what a velociraptor is like. Actually, I've been told that the actual velociraptors were more this size, and what the ones that you use in the movies are more Utah raptor sized. But anyway.
We're going to switch the microphone real quick.
Okay, well let's switch the microphone and make sure, let's do a sound check, make sure people can still hear me.
We're plugged in with the same microphone again.
Okay.
Now my phone's charging as well.
Now your phone's charging as well. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's important.
So this next one comes from Facebook, from Yusra Taheri, and I apologize for butchering that name. Says, hey Brandon, I want to write a fantastical story, but my thoughts are fully occupied during my 9-to-5 job, which impacts my creative juices.
Yep, totally does.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to dig down deep to reach that well of potential?
Man, so in some ways you're asking the wrong person, because what's that?
I don't know that it's going through the mic. It sounds a lot more distant.
Oh, than it used to?
Did before.
Yeah, that's good. That's why it's good to
Any changes?
I've got a delay here, so it takes a little
Okay.
bit.
It takes a few seconds. All right. We're
I'm
gonna
way
fiddle
delayed. I'm
with
like
the mic
almost a
before we
minute
answer this
delayed, I
question.
think.
Okay.
You might need to keep talking though.
Yes, I need to keep talking.
I'm
I
like a
suppose.
minute behind you on
Yeah.
my stream, so.
But you can still hear it, so I can answer the question, and then we can fiddle with the mic. So,
It's just not as clear, or not at all.
yeah, you need to tell me if I should keep talking or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
just. I can hear you. It just
Yeah.
you sound more distant.
Okay,
I'm
so-
not sure if the microphone's.
If
I almost
the
wonder
microphone's-
if unplugging
Oops.
it, plugging it back in, just disconnected and strictly going through the iPhone.
Mm.
Should we try putting it back in the
It's
other port,
barely
maybe?
at the point where I'm talking, so
Yeah. So
I don't know.
Let's see if
Sorry.
we can do this.
technical issues.
And if it dies,
That
we'll.
won't work. You'd have to go back into
Oh,
this.
thank you. Apple.
Let me try.
So what's the question we're answering again?
Advice for someone who works a 9-to-5
Oh,
job
yeah.
and
In some ways, I'm the wrong person to ask this to because I cheated, right? I never had a 9-to-5 job while I was trying to be a writer. My job was the graveyard shift at the hotel where I could write at work. So really, to get a good
Sounds
answer
great
on
right
this, you need to ask other authors, right? People who did it. I do know that jobs that take a lot of your mental energy tend to be jobs that make it challenging for a writer. Definitely. Like, it's kind of funny, but I often joke that if you really want to be a writer, being a bricklayer is a great job, right? Manual labor is actually a really good job for being a writer. That's terrible advice because you should find a job that you really like and that is engaging to you. And I would say my friends who have had to do this, what they have done is they have often written before work or they have written during their lunch break rather than after work, because if your mind is fully occupied during the entire work day, a lot of times that leaves you mentally exhausted for your writing time at night, which is just less than ideal. So a lot of people train themselves to get up early and do it in the morning, which sounds miserable to me, I know. The other thing is, if you can train yourself to get into a writing mode, maybe by taking your Saturdays to be a writer for a while, and just, when you're not mentally exhausted, and when you can spare, a chunk of time, and you start to train yourself with a habit of writing. Like, you are going to turn on the same music every time. You're going to sit in the same chair. You're going to go on a walk beforehand each time, listening to that music. Whatever it is that gets you in the writing mode, and then you're going to train yourself to this on these Saturdays, and then you're going to see if you can transition to doing this one weekday a week, and see if getting into that mindset is good enough for you to mode shift or something like that.
this one's from Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
from Akshase John.
Mm-hmm.
It says, do you watch anime? If so, what's the most recent anime you've watched, and what's your all-time favorite? And has any other media other than books influenced you in terms of storytelling?
I would say that, to the second question, film would be my number 2. Quite obviously, I think, if you read my books. Like, I often say one of the big differences between me and Robert Jordan, and something that I just couldn't fake in writing the Wheel of Time books, was he served in Vietnam and was in battle. I learned how to write battle scenes from Jackie Chan, right? This is a very big difference in our writing styles, and that's one of the things that I couldn't fake. I couldn't fake that, living through an actual war like him. So cinema would be the number 2 after books. Television, not as much. And that's just because when I was growing up, it was hard to find a television show that wasn't annoying in the way that it did long-form storytelling. They're really common right now, where you get basically 8-hour movies as a season, and they're fantastic. But there wasn't a lot of that when I was growing up. Even the best shows that I watched, like Next Generation, had no continuing storylines, and were often kind of forced to reset character relationships and dynamics at the beginning of the season, and that's just, I really dislike that method of storytelling. We watch, my wife loves The Good Place, and it is a funny show. And it is a well-acted show, and it is a really well-written show. And yet every season they have to hit the reset button because it's network television, and it feels like, you know, all the character development that characters have gone through has to be reset so they can keep doing the same premise rather than letting it evolve. And that sort of storytelling gets really frustrating to me. Fortunately, anime does not have that problem in general. However, I am not the biggest anime fan. Not because of anything specific, but it's not a subculture that I was really involved with when I was a young man. I was really into epic fantasy novels and things like that, and my brother was the anime fan. And so I watched a lot of the greatest hits of anime and have a healthy respect for it. But I haven't watched any new anime in a long time. Like, the newest anime I've considered watching is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, because, like, literally the entire internet and all of my friends say, Brandon, this is a show tailor-made for you. I have watched, like, Last Airbender, which is kind of like fake anime, right? Western animation done in anime style. My favorite all-time is Cowboy Bebop, unless you count Miyazaki, then Miyazaki is my favorite, followed by Cowboy Bebop, but they are really close. Bebop is probably my favorite science fiction visual medium story that I've ever watched. Just fantastic. And, of course, you know, Miyazaki, which is kind of like cheating, right? Because I think that the vast majority of people will be like, yeah, you have to put Miyazaki in your top 10, even if, you know, you've watched hundreds of anime. I could be wrong on that, but that's my impression of it. But I saw a lot growing up, right? I saw Ranma, I saw, in college, a lot of my friends were into anime, so I would just go hang out with them, and so because of them, I watched whatever was big back then, like Trigun and Outlaw Star and stuff like that. Whatever was on, like, on Adult Swim or whatever, because I worked the graveyard shift, and so whatever happened to be on at like 10:30 or 11 before I could start writing, because there were just too many people still coming in to the hotel. I watched a lot of Dragon Ball Z that way, which I'm really shocked that I survived through, but Dragon Ball Z Abridged is amazing, and I can appreciate that now because of Dragon Ball Z being on when I was at work, so... there's some for you. I know that my anime experience is lacking, particularly because I haven't watched Full Metal Alchemist yet, which I really ought to do. I need to talk my wife into watching it with me. Most television shows I watch with my wife, and so it kind of has to be something that my wife will also enjoy for me to watch it. We finished Good Omens recently, and now we're watching The Mandalorian, so, yeah. So, how did we turn out with the audio stuff? Like...
Sounds fun. People comments have all been, it's great.
It's great? Okay. So we're good, there. Oh, I wanted to mention, video games. I do find video games very interesting. I play a lot of games. And I love when a video game can do storytelling in a way that a book can't. That's just really cool to me. So that's part of the reasons why I like the From Software games, Dark Souls and things like that, because their storytelling method is just something that would never, you couldn't even conceive of how to do that in a book. You know, it's mostly told through found lore on items that you pick up and things like that, and I love stuff like that because it's so different from what I do.
This one's from Instagram, from Stevie B Art.
Mm-hmm.
Says, we're studying King Lear in English, and I noticed that the character, the Fool, is very much like Wit.
Yep.
I was wondering if you've ever read King Lear, and did you write Wit to be like him?
Yeah, Wit is, Wit comes from the Fool from King Lear, and also the Fool, I don't know if they call him the Fool, Twelfth Night also has one. The Jester character in Shakespeare is a direct inspiration for Wit. I I love them, particularly the Fool and Lear. Like, Lear is one of my favorite stories, and even to this day, you know, I don't actually, maybe the Fool, it might be Kent who says it. I think it's Kent who says, "See better, Lear." Like, that line, right, is one of those succinct, beautiful, powerful lines that's burned into the back of my brain, that I read when, you know, way back when I was in high school, and I've since experienced King Lear. Usually I like to go to Shakespeare rather than read Shakespeare, for obvious reasons. But yeah, definitely. I would say, though, I was already writing wit at the time. The fact that that Robin Hobb did such a fantastic Fool character in the Assassins, the Fitz books, that Fool definitely had an influence on me as well. You know, one of the things I always, I always wanted to do with wit was to make sure that he felt different from just another court jester, because I'm assuming I'm not the only one inspired by Shakespeare to create a character similar. And I spent a lot of time early in my career in the unpublished days saying, what's going to make Hoy different from just another jester? And I spent a lot of time on that. And when I publish, eventually, I'll let you guys read Dragonsteel. He reads way more like a Shakespearean fool in Dragonsteel than he eventually became in the later Cosmere books once I was getting published.
This next one comes from Redditor R0AX_.
Okay.
How do you research the physics elements of your books? How much would you say you alter the laws of physics, and how much do you respect them? And
Right.
follow up to that, a few comments down is specifically wondering about Skyward.
I these days am able to cheat on this a little bit, right? Because I know I have a really good support structure of people who have actually studied physics, rather than myself, where I've, you know, flirted with studying physics. I'm not a scientist, but I love pop science, if that makes sense, right? I'm the person who loves to read a book about someone doing science, but when I was a chemistry major in college, the actual physical labor of running experiments was mind-numbingly boring to me. And so I like to know what rules I'm breaking and how to play with them. But these days, I'm really able to trust my kind of basic pop science studies. And so I'm not going to go read 7 textbooks on physics. What am I going to do? I'm going to go to YouTube and say, all right, what does it actually look like for someone to pull X number of G's? And I will watch those videos, right? There's actually some really good ones on YouTube about that specifically. I'm going to go read blog posts, because our internet is so great, from pilots talking about their experiences. Like, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for what the physicist says happens. I'm looking for, how does a pilot describe it, and how is it presented for a layman, right? And then I am going to do my best and find experts to read the book for me, right? And tell me where I'm wrong. I often say that you can get yourself most of the way there in research as an author with a minimal amount of time. You just need to find an expert who spent, you know, all the extra time that it takes to become a true expert, read your book and tell you where you're wrong. Preferably a couple of people, because turns out people in any profession disagree with one another greatly on some points, and it's good to know which ones the points those are. So that's literally what I did for Skyward, is YouTube videos, first-hand accounts, and a couple of pop culture essays, you know, stuff that's only like 2,000 to 5,000 words long, about what the experience feels like and why it's working like it's working, followed by getting some physicists and some fighter pilots both to read my early draft and tell me what I was doing wrong. How much do I try? I try. So Sanderson Zeroth Law says always err on the side of what's awesome. What this means for me realistically is I want to tell a good story. And telling a good story takes precedent over basically anything else. That means that when I don't want to break laws of physics for no reason. and I want to know when I'm breaking the laws of physics. But I am going to find a cheat that lets me tell the story the way I want to tell it, if there becomes a conflict. The most famous one for me of this is the red shift that would happen when you make time bubbles in Era 2 of Mistborn, right? When I was working on this and researching it and be like, what would actually happen? Turns out that a lot of the research I was reading said, yeah, you would redshift the light or whatever, and you would really have a chance of irradiating everybody outside or inside the bubble, depending. And I just had to say, you know what? I've got to come up with a law in the magic system that fixes this and makes it not happen, because otherwise I just can't do the magic, right? That was good for me to know, but it's also a place where I just decided to cheat. And we can, as fantasy authors, cheat. So let's wait for the next question, since we're going to have number 2 of essentially 40 of these things get taken away from me. Why I make 3 piles, by the way, is these pens that I really like to use, that Magellan really likes to eat. These pens are, they're a little wet when you write with them. That's part of why I like them. You don't have a lot of skips. You don't have, you can use a lighter touch and things like that. Oh, feeling good? That's really great, but it also means that if I don't leave them to dry for a second, they will stain the page that I'm setting on top of it. So I have to make 3 piles. You've recovered, Magellan, from being freaked out for a second there? Yeah. Good bird. He might talk to you, he might not. We'll have to see. So he's not looking like he's in a super talkative mood.
This next one comes from Skylar Cecil. Says, I've been writing, and while I feel fairly confident in my prose, my experience writing nonfiction translates least well to dialogue. And I keep getting frustrated that this specific part of my writing feels so far behind the rest of my writing. I also tried to outline my whole story, and it feels so small and soulless and derivative. Maybe it's just the nature of taking an impersonal destination approach to what will be a close-up journey before destination story at its best. Do you have any encouragement or tips?
Yeah, so the first one is this is going to depend on where you are in your writing career. Don't stress too much about your early books, right? Like this is a thing that we all do, and it's hard for me to say. Don't be stressed, right? But try not to be stressed. Try to remember that you are probably comparing your first draft to published authors' final drafts, particularly published authors who have been at it for 20 years or 30 years. And it's okay to be experimenting and exploring new things and things that are hard for you, and having them not turn out like you imagined is just part of the game. It's part of the process. It's part of learning how to be a writer. And so, first off, cut yourself some slack. Let yourself be able to fail. But you obviously are self-aware enough to kind of know where some of these problems are. I would make sure that that readers actually think that these are problems by giving your writing to some people and seeing what they say about it, right? It's entirely possible that you're wrong on those points. Not likely. I would say that you sound self-aware enough that you actually know. But those are kind of my 2 upfront caveats. If you want to get better at dialogue, studying screenplays by great screenplay writers is a fantastic way to do it. And trying to do it yourself, right? Trying to write something like a screenplay that forces you to focus only on the dialogue. One of the things you're going to want to ask yourself, though, is what kind of dialogue do you want to learn to write? Watch movies and see what dialogue really appeals to you by certain writers, by certain screenwriters. And why I say this is there are different types of dialogue out there. There is the Tarantino style dialogue. There is the Joss Whedon style dialogue. There is the Alan Sorkin style dialogue. Like, these are all different kind of methods of doing dialogue, and they kind of split into categories between how realistic are you trying to be and how little do you care for realism and focus instead on snappy dialogue and things like that. Like, that's kind of your first dividing point. The most important thing you can learn to do is make your characters sound distinctive. If your characters sound distinctive, that's going to push you to write better dialogue if you're trying to do this, right? If you say, I have to write a scene with 3 different people and I can't put any tags on them, and so readers have to be able to know just from context who each of these people are by their motivations, the way they speak, and you know, the posture that they're taking with the tone of their words, their diction, things like this. When you learn to do that, your dialogue is going to level up quite a bit, and then you can start to ask yourself, where do I want to be on this? Do I want to be writing this really snappy but kind of fake sounding dialogue, which a lot of us really like, or am I going to be focusing on really trying to make it feel real? Sitting out and listening to people chat, or just at a family function and scribbling down notes about how they talk in real life, this can be really helpful for creating that realistic dialogue. Work on it, practice it, use some writing exercises, read some screenplays. You'll get there, but also give yourself some leeway.
Next one's from Twitter, from Watt Up, Wheel of Time Up. Says, what was your reaction when you were asked to finish Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time?
It was dumbfoundedment. In the actual literal meaning of the word, I had trouble speaking. In fact, I tell this story a lot, so I'm sorry if many of you have heard it, but I wrote an email to Harriet that night, and I said, Dear Harriet, I promise I'm not an idiot. I'm sorry I couldn't speak when you asked this. If you don't know the story is that I didn't know Robert Jordan or Harriet. If you're not familiar with Harriet, who was the editor on the Wheel of Time books, she was Robert Jordan's wife. She discovered him as a writer first and then married him. Great way to make sure that your editorial advice gets taken. And she, amazing editor, right? I got to work with her. She is the best editor I have ever worked with. And Moshe, my editor on my other books, is really good. So Harriet was fantastic as an editor. She edited Ender's Game is another one of her books. She just did a lot of fantastic work in the business. And she's the one who called me. I got it as a voicemail message. I got up in the morning because I'm a writer, so mornings for me are like noon. This is why we're streaming this at 1. I got up at 12:30 and came over. Harriet just had said, well, Brandon Sanderson, there's something I want to talk to you about. Will you please call me back? And I had no idea what was going on here. So I tried to call her back. You're really trying to eat those, aren't you? Here, why don't you get your pen back? Play with that. Oh, you got, wow. Yeah, you did number on that one, huh? That one, probably the ink will come out if you keep biting it. So, yes, you, so could you guys, oh, there we go. Play with this. There's no ink in that one. Yeah, there's lots of fun stuff on that. We'll start on the floor there. So you even have a toy over here you should play with. So I had no idea what was going on. I tried to call her back, but she was out getting a massage. And so I didn't get a hold of her, right? And I was super nervous. My wife jokes that I was more nervous that day than I was on our wedding day. She's a little bit jealous, I think, when she says that. But I had, months to get ready for the wedding. But for this, it just dropped on me. So I called my editor, Moshe, to ask him if he knew what was going on. And he didn't answer, which is not surprising. Moshe never answers. You want to get a hold of Moshe, you have to call him at 2 a.m. Part of why we work so well together. And so I called my agent, who always answers, but he didn't answer. And so I went upstairs to my wife and I said, Robert Jordan's widow just called me. She's like, what? What did she want? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't get a hold of her. Finally, I thought to call Tor Books, the publisher, And I got a hold of Patrick Nielsen Hayden, one of the editors there, and I'm like, Patrick, what's going on? He's like, oh, that. Yeah, it's what you probably think it is. I'm like, I don't know what I think it is. He's like, I'll have her call you back. So eventually Harriet calls me back, and she says, well, I was just wondering if you would be interested in finishing my late husband's work. Just like that. I had written a little blog post about what Robert Jordan had meant to me. A friend of hers had printed that off at the funeral because she was looking for things on the internet where people had said nice things about Robert Jordan. And she brought them to Harriet, put mine on top, and said, you should read this one in particular. He's an author. And so Harriet called my publisher and said, who's this guy? The publisher said, oh yeah, Brandon Sanderson, let me send you Mistborn. It's pretty good. Basically she wanted to know if I was interested before she spent a lot of time thinking about it and deciding. And I could barely answer, right? I sounded enough like an idiot that I felt like I had to email her afterward. But I spent that night tossing and turning, thinking about it, and I was actually a little bit uncertain, right? Like, if I said yes and I screwed up the Wheel of Time, then I was the person who screwed up the Wheel of Time, right? But what happened over time that night as I was thinking, I'm like, if I say no and they go get somebody else, and that one person screws up the Wheel of Time, I've still screwed up the Wheel of Time, plus I'm a coward, right? And as I thought about it, like, you can definitely find bigger Wheel of Time fans than me. I have met most of them, right? You can definitely find better authors than me, right? I mentioned a couple of them on this stream already. Go read Guy Kay and Jane Yolen if you want to find authors better than me. But you create a Venn diagram of pretty big Wheel of Time fans and pretty good epic fantasy writers, and you look at what's in the middle there. There aren't a lot of names in the middle there, I think. And they could have maybe gone and gotten a ghostwriter who wasn't a Wheel of Time fan, and maybe the books would have been okay, but I feel like I was kind of, like, in part, my whole life was leading me toward this, and so I wrote to her and I said, if Robert Jordan can't write this, because it's obviously ideal if he had been able to finish it, but since he can't, I want to be the one who does it, because at least then it's the hands of a fan, and at least then a fan screws it up, which I felt would somehow be better, and at least I would have given it a shot, because I knew I was going to take it seriously. And so that's what I told her. I actually had to go on tour for, like, Mistborn, was it 3? I think it was 3. I had to go on tour for Mistborn 3 while she was considering. This was 2007, so a launch was 2005. So this was actually Mistborn 2. And so I went on tour, not knowing, not being able to tell anyone. Not that a lot of people showed up to my my signings back then, but you know, there were a handful. There were a couple of you. Not being able to tell anyone that I'd been asked to finish the Wheel of Time, maybe. Harriet took about a month to consider it. Read a lot of my writing during that time, and then came back in like November after my tour and said, I would like you to do this, if you're still willing. Then so I said, yep. I called my agent and I said, make this happen. He's like, well, we'll see what the terms are. And I said, no. We just say yes, make this happen. And shortest contract negotiations of my entire career. And I was a couple weeks later in Harriet's house reading the ending that Robert Jordan had written. So
this one's from Instagrammer ZZOwl2019. Says, I was wondering if you ever had any doubts about becoming an author, and what other profession would you have chosen if you had to?
Oh, what a great question. So there are multiple points in my life where you can look at and find distinct sort of questions or concerns or worries that I had about becoming a writer. Probably early on was the first one, right? If you found me at age 16 when I was trying my very first book, which was called Dragonsteel, but not the eventual Dragonsteel that I wrote, though Hoyd was in it, and wow, he was a cliche back then, but he was in the book. So was Dalinar under a different name. I hid those pages as I printed them off behind the picture in my room the picture hanging on the wall so that no one would find them and make fun of me, right? So you can see right from those actions, speaking louder than any words I could give you, that I was terrified of the idea that someone would find my writing and make fun of me. And I was really uncertain that I could be a writer. Like, if you don't know my story, I'll try not to go into it too much for people who've heard it 100 times, but I was not a writer when I was a kid. I was made into I was not a reader when I was a kid. I was made into one by a teacher in 8th grade who got me reading fantasy novel, Dragon's Bane by Robert Hamley. To this day, one of my favorites. I just fell in love with writing. Oh yeah, hey, will you grab a cup of water from Jellin too? Because we don't have a water thing on this as you're going around. Just a cup of lukewarm water or whatever. Thanks. I became a reader because of that. I fell in love with books. I read through all of the Barbara Hamley books I could get, all the Anne McCaffrey books, and all the Melanie Ron books. Those were my introduction into fantasy. Over the summer that year, discovered Terry Brooks and David Eddings, which were classic fantasy books at the time, and just became a big fan of the genre. I got immersed in reading and tried my hand at writing, and I was so uncertain. And during those high school years, my mother would kind of, she learned, and my mother's a great woman, and a lot of people talk about their parents, discouraging them and things like that. That's not what she did, but she was very concerned about me becoming a writer. You want this one now, don't you? She was very concerned about me becoming a writer. Because she thought that I couldn't earn any money at it, and she's an accountant, and being an accountant, she, had legitimate concerns and worries about me becoming a writer, and those worries and concerns, were passed on to me. What do you want to do? Why don't you go on your XR on for a little bit? And so I was uncertain, right? Then I started writing really in earnest, and discovered just how much I loved it, and how the hours would pass as if only minutes to me, whereas chemistry, it felt like the minutes were hours. And so I really got more encouraged. The next big discouragement point, though, happens after I graduate with my bachelor's degree in English. I apply to all the MFA programs, that I'm interested in, which tended to be, let's admit, top programs, because I'm not one who likes to settle. And they all rejected me, right? Columbia, University of Utah, Iowa, NYU, several in California. Rejections from all of them. And I was submitting, I believe, Elantris at the time. And I got somewhat discouraged because I was submitting these books to editors, and I kept getting responses from editors that were saying that my books were too long. This was the big problem I was getting. Books are too long. And they also would say frequently, in fact, I remember an editor at Del Rey that I asked, I was pitching a book to, and they're like, couldn't you write something more like George R. R. Martin? Send me a book like George R. R. Martin. I'm like, oh, great, yeah. Just magically write the most influential fantasy book of the last 10 years. Yeah, I'll get on that, right? But they wanted, what they really wanted is they wanted to find Joe Abercrombie, right? They wanted gritty, low magic, fast-paced short books. That was what the kind of everyone was hunting for. Something like George R. R. Martin, but was not so long because they were worried that readers wouldn't, get on board for something that was 1,000 pages long. Oh yeah, you could have just gotten a copy, but here, he's a little nervous about that. Here, what? Magellan, look, we have water. We have water right here. Are you thirsty?
Didn't want to shred a paper cup and eat it.
Yeah. What? You gonna? All right. Well, we'll let him chew on my hair for a sec. This is not gonna sit the problem. I usually, yeah, this is fine.
Is a paper cup okay?
A paper cup's fine. A glass cup's fine. A plastic cup's fine. You just tip it up and he drinks out of it.
Okay.
But that's fine too. You're great. Are you gonna sit here for a minute? Just don't poop on me, okay? Magellan doesn't actually poop on people. He, for whatever reason, doesn't like to do it. I'm going to try and potty train him eventually, but for right now, he's only pooped on me once, and that was the second day I had him. So yeah, where was I? What am I talking about? What's this question?
This question
Yeah.
was...
was I ever nervous about my writing career? Yeah, and so...
And what would you choose if you had to choose something?
My big decision point came after all these books were getting rejected, and I got rejected from all these different university courses, right? And it's like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I trying this? Like, at some point you have to acknowledge that after you've written 12 novels, which I had at this time, and no one's buying them, you've got to admit, maybe that's a sign that you aren't meant to do this, right? And it was the closest I think I came to giving up, because no one wanted to read what I was writing, right? And I really liked what I was writing, and I actually tried to write something like George R. R. Martin. That's where the book, The Final Empire, not the one that you read, not the one published one, came from, and the book Mistborn. You can't eat my glasses, you know that. And I tried submitting these books to to the guy who became my agent, Joshua, and he read them and he's like, "Wow, it feels like you took a real step backward." And still remember that rejection letter. He's like, "Wow, I thought you were getting really close, but these books are much worse." And they were. They were terrible. The original Mistborn was not a heist novel. It was like a dark and gritty anti-hero novel, which is not something that I was equipped to write at that point in my career, let's say. And so I'm like, great. What am I doing with my life? Should I just give up? But I thought about it, and I realized, come on, Joe, that I really love doing this. Oh, where'd that water cup go?
Did they bring you one yet?
I don't know.
I don't think they brought you one yet.
Okay. I just really loved it, right? And I realized that if I oh, there it is. I also need like a towel or something, a paper towel. Here, drink some water. I realized that there's nothing to chew on in Plato in here. This is just water. I realized that if I reached age 100 and I had written 150 unpublished novels, but I had loved writing every one of them, that I was less of a failure than if I gave up because it turns out that that what I write is not hugely popular. And I thought, well, I'm just going to keep at it, right? I'm gonna not worry about being published. I'm gonna write the books that I want to write. I'm gonna stop trying to hunt what it is that I think I should be writing. And that's when I wrote the first draft of The Way of Kings, right? A book that was twice as long as the two long ones that they've been rejecting. A book that was, in many ways, the kind of anti-Game of Thrones, right? Game of Thrones, one of the big things everyone was looking for was, oh, we got a paper towel, thanks, Joe. Was defined by low magic and by kind of this grittiness and question of like who is a hero and who's not, and it's actually really good, right? George Martin did a fantastic job with that, but that's not what I wanted to write, and so I wrote The Way of Kings kind of as me kind of flipping the proverbial bird at the publishing industry, saying, "All right, you don't want to read what I write. I'm going to write an extra big, extra Brandon-y version of the stuff you've been rejecting." And it was a really cathartic experience for me. It was a really fantastic experience, and it turns out that I sold Elantris soon after I wrote Way of Kings. Elantris I had sent to an editor 18 months earlier, right? And it had just been sitting on his desk. He actually, Moshe, said, "Yeah, it was so long. I really kept putting it off and reading other things, and I was going to reject it, but I kept thinking, oh, that kid was just so nice." Right? I met him at a party at the World Fantasy Convention in Montreal, and he just kept thinking, he was so nice and so excited. I should read his book. And so he not reject it without reading it, but he kept moving it to the bottom of the list. And when he finally got to it, he wanted it. He actually only read like a third of it, and he's like, wow! And he then called me. Also came as a voicemail, by the way. So I guess message is to listen to your voicemail, where he, this is a funny story. So back then in the olden days, the days of the dinosaurs, I had first been on the internet via AOL, like a lot of people, right? In the late 90s. And then AOL started to realize I can get a better email address from someone else, and I can get my internet through someone else, and it's just a better situation overall, but it costs you when you changed your email. You couldn't at that point keep your AOL email address, which is the one I had been submitting all of my books through. Because I was a college student, I changed jobs frequently. And back then, this was at the transition between cell phones and house phones, right? When I had submitted a launch list, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a mobile. I just used house phones. And as a college student, you often move around a lot. And so turns out that my email address was bad, my physical address was bad, and my phone was bad. Perhaps I should have thought of this and sent him a postcard or something updating my information, but I thought the book was just gone, right? 18 months is long enough in the industry that usually you're like, okay, they just lost it. And I had sent books to editors before that I still haven't heard back on. In fact, I sent one to Tor, and part of me just still thinks they will someday be cleaning out boxes and some intern will end up reading slush from 20 years ago, and they'll happen across white sand that I submitted to Tor and never got a rejection from, and they'll be like, oh, let's read this book, and be like, wow, this is great. Wait, this is Sanderson. I'll get a rejection letter, an acceptance letter through Tor. But anyway, that was on me. He actually managed to find me by going to my BYU faculty page, because at that point I had gone back to BYU for my master's because I'd been rejected from everywhere else, but they let me in to get a master's degree. I was teaching freshman composition, and I had my phone number on there for my students, and he found it, and he called me, and he said, hey, you're a hard guy to get a hold of. I'd like to buy your book. That was a really nice phone call to get, let's just say. After how many years of trying to break in. It was 2003 when that happened, and I had started writing my first book in, 93. First serious book had probably been 97. Now you're bored. And so that was a really cool email or phone call to get. What would I do if I hadn't made it take off? I probably would have ended up as a professor. No, you can't eat hands. You can't eat hands. Nope. No. You eat hands, you get put on your perch again. Oh, you're going to have to go on your perch again. Can't eat hands. I probably would have ended up as one, though the problem with that is my master's program, the first day we had an orientation where a professor got up and talked to us and said, here's what it takes to become an English professor, right? It's actually highly competitive, really difficult to do. There are a lot more people who get degrees in English than there are jobs. It was a really bad sign when the backup job I had thought of was as hard to get as becoming an author, or at least it seemed. And he showed us the CV of people who got accepted to major PhD programs and went on to have careers, and talked about all the things we were going to need to do, being research partners with professors and working on the journals and doing this and doing that. And I realized I can't do any of that and write my books. So I had to choose, as I had chosen many times in the past, that I was going to focus on my writing, and that meant not doing any of the stuff that he was telling us in that class that we had to do if we want to become a professor. And so the chances that I actually managed to become an English professor are very, very slim. because I just wasn't doing any of the things you need to do. I was focusing on my books, and if my books didn't sell, then that's not exactly going to be something that gets you a job. Plus, all the MFA programs had rejected me, which is the terminal degree in teaching creative writing. So I wasn't going to be able to teach creative writing. I already knew that, and I wasn't going to be able to teach English because I wasn't going to be able to get into any of those English programs. So yeah. So I don't know what I would have done. Probably ended up like in a call center or something miserable.
So I'm gonna switch this again real quick.
Okay. Yeah. You've got to go get on your ISR. You're gonna be bored down here. What? No, you can't eat my jacket. It's not a toy. Oh, he sees buttons. He really likes buttons. Yeah, buttons are his favorite thing in the whole world. He loves buttons. Eat another pen. Eat another pen.
Do you want me to get somebody to take some of the ink out of those?
Well, yeah, we should probably actually... Here. Oh,
So
you're not going to give it back now, are you?
Just
Here.
prep a couple.
Then prep one of them, pull the ink out of it, because I'll need the ink in a second anyway. We'll put it into this one and give him that one to play with. Because we can give him pens that no longer work. Actually, we sometimes save these. Are we doing this then and throw them in orders?
We talked about that.
We talked about that. Just throwing empty ink pens that I've used signing books into orders.
Media Mill may not like that though.
It's empty.
Here, use this one. Eat this one. Eat this one. Eat this one. Yeah, I know. Stealing pens from parrots. They really are. If you guys haven't been around parrots, they're basically bright red flying puppies with can openers for faces. Right? This is what a parrot is. They can be very affectionate and also very grumpy, as Joe will attest, who Magellan has bit a couple of times. Joe's a reptile person, so he's used to being having animals bite him, though. So yeah.
Mark played once, so.
Don't you have a monitor? Like you have a Savannah monitor or something? Like one of the real monsters of a thing? Yeah.
He'll be 7 feet long when he's full grown.
Yeah. Compared to Magellan, a Savannah, or compared to a Savannah monitor, Magellan is a tiny and quaint little thing with a barely noticeable bite. All right, next question.
So the next one was from Reddit.
Ooh.
I'll try and pronounce Dasanaikar, maybe.
Okay.
Says, which magic system have you seen or read about that you wish you would have thought of first, and has it affected anything you created yourself?
So a couple of my favorite magic systems. So obviously I really like the Wheel of Time's magic system. I just think that the visual component of weaving mixed with the idea that, a percentage of the people who use it are going to go crazy. Like it has built-in drama. It has really cool visuals and things like that. I also really like Melniron's Sunrunner magic system. It's one of the first kind of semi-rule-based magic system involving some sort of physics rules and stuff that I read, and that definitely had an influence on me. Right? It's not as rule-based as some of the modern magic systems like mine or Brett Wake's or something, but it's certainly a precursor to where that went. The one that I kind of wish I had developed is David Farland's Rune Magic from the Rune Lords. It's just really cool. It involves branding people and stealing attributes from them and branding them onto other people. That creates a link between them, and so you can, have someone else's strength. They come an invalid, and so you have to take care of them, because if someone kills that invalid, then you lose your magic strength. And the sort of economic, the awful economic incentives that this gives to a society to create just this monstrous sort of terrible situation where people are being forced to give up, vital attributes, their sight, so that another person who's wealthy and powerful can see better and things like that. Like, it is just excruciating and really interesting to read about and really well written. And so if you haven't read the Rune Lords, the magic system is just fantastic in those. And I admire Pat's also. So what Pat Rothfuss has done is very similar to what Tolkien did, but in a completely different way. Tolkien has a hard and a soft magic in his books, which is part of what makes Lord of the Rings work so well, in my opinion, at least on the magic side, is you have a really hard magic, which is the One Ring, right? You know what the One Ring can do, you know its powers. Granted, it has, things to it, aspects to it that are beyond understanding, but what happens when Frodo puts that ring on, the consequences and cost. And the power, and it's really, really a hard magic system the way that Tolkien uses it, and he uses it exactly in the sort of way that a hard magic system is good to use, right? He's solving problems with the magic, but also then having to pay the price for solving those problems that way. And really, really cool. But he also has a soft magic, kind of exemplified in Gandalf. We never really know what Gandalf is capable of. It's bigger and grander than a hobbit can really grasp, or than a reader can really grasp. And what this does is it gives Tolkien the best of both worlds, right? It's a wondrous world where a hobbit feels very small, not just metaphorically, obviously, but that is the metaphor. This grand, giant world with these characters are like, we can't understand the powers that Gandalf has and the powers that Sauron has. But we have one trick up our sleeves, which is this hard magic that we can use and we can understand. And that back and forth creates for just great magic storytelling. You get the sense of wonder of a non-rule-based magic system, and you get the crunchy problem-solving ability for your protagonist of a hard magic system. Best of both worlds, right? Pat's done the same thing in Name of the Wind, which is what is part of, it's only one of the aspects, but part of what makes Name of the Wind such a great book is that there is a hard magic system in the sympathetic magic that you can follow and you can learn, and Quoth can learn and practice, and you can kind of come to understand, as he does, how this magic works. And then there's the soft magic system in naming things, which, has this other professor who's gone a little mad trying to understand these things, that is kind of like poetry, which reinforces one of the other themes of Name of the Wind, which is poetry and music. And a magic system that works more like poetry and music, and that you can't really define it, you can't really understand it, but if you can approach it, you can do beautiful and wonderful things. So he gets the sense of wonder of that, plus he gets the crunchiness of a rule-based magic system in sympathy, and the way those two interact are a major theme in those books, and it is just pure genius how those two magic systems interact, and part of why those books are so great.
So, the next one is from Facebook, from Tristan Gilmore, says, this is perhaps more of a writing excuses question, but at what point of the story do you intentionally finish, in quotations, building up, and transition to reveals and answering the intrigue you've established? Or do these need to be intertwined to keep the novel from being a constant uphill, downhill of interest?
Right. So, in answer to your second question first, yes, it is good to stagger these a bit. This is something I didn't understand as well when I was brand new into writing. In some of my early, particularly unpublished books, the Brandon Avalanche, which people talk about, that comes at the end of a book where all the threads are finally coming together and stuff, was just way too much in these early books. And what happened is you couldn't follow all the threads or give them time to actually have impact, because always another one was happening. And it ended up having kind of boring situations leading to too much excitement that you couldn't actually take time to reflect on anything that was happening. So staggering your reveals is a really good thing to practice. Even if you want to have an avalanche at the end like I have, staggering some of that, having some character climaxes happen at different parts and different points in the story, just a really good idea. But where do you start doing it? That's kind of the definition for me. Hey, what's that? You want to get on my arm? Yes? I'm not going to give you any buttons to eat. What do you want? You don't want to be scratched. You just want to be on camera? You just want to be photogenic? Or do you want the pen that I am playing with, don't you? You want the pen, or you want to eat the pages because I'm playing with them? Oh, thank you. Yeah, like, that transition. Alright, go back on the ISR. No? Not even interested. Not interested now that you're on my hand. That moment, Act 2 into Act 3. The moment right after kind of the, where things have just turned south, is the moment where I start trying to have those reveals in most books. But, again, I'm trying to stagger them. I'm trying to have mini reveals, particularly in a big epic fantasy. You want lots of ups and downs, right? Yeah.
Cool. This next one is from Twitter, from Hossmobile. Said, if you could have a beer with one of your characters, which would it be?
Well, since I don't drink, I would have a root beer. I would like to go hang out with Sazed. That would be my choice. I think Sazed is more wise than I was able to write him being, and would have lots of good advice for me.
This next one is from Instagram, from Inquisitor William. Says, how do you make characters' personalities? I've tried to make characters, but I specialize in world building.
Yeah.
That's it. Oh, yeah.
How do you make characters' personalities? So, the big level ups I've had in this, the first one came when I realized that I was writing characters to roles instead of to being people. And when I started to ask myself, what would they be doing in their daily life? Like, what are their ambitions and their motivations if the plot never hit them? And trying to find interesting motivations and ambitions that are different. Like, we always talk about having characters have quirks. And when this goes wrong, what happens is each of your characters has some crazy thing about them, right? Which maybe works in a comedy, but in a lot of stories, it's just like some crazy thing. Then your book feels so goofy, but the characters don't feel real, right? If you look at it and say, what's an interesting motivation? What's an interesting goal or ambition that this character could have that I haven't seen a lot of characters have? You can't go on my head. Before. Like, that leads to interesting characters. If their motivations and their ambitions, or their conflict in life. Like, what is an interesting conflict? Just a normal sort of conflict. Yeah, up on the head. That'll make a good screenshot, I bet. Up on, like, really interesting motivations or conflicts. That sort of quirk. Like, the character who has, like, when I had a good friend in college who was a woman who was 6'1", right? And that impacted her life a lot. I'm sure there are women who are 6'1" that it's not as big a deal to, but for her, this was a big deal. She talked about it a lot, the challenges of finding clothing, the challenges of dating, the challenges of how she felt that people looked at her, and things like that. Was just a big aspect to her life that is not something that is, as a guy who's 6'1", I had never even considered. And that became, a quirk for Serene, the character who's a little bit based on Annie, my friend at the time, where this character dealing with something in life that is just different from what a lot of people have to deal with, and that made her way more interesting to write, way more interesting to read, way more rounded as a character because it wasn't all just about her place in the plot. She had other things about her. So, yeah, you were just getting too bored here. We're gonna have to send you home if you keep getting bored. Then you won't be on camera, huh? See, what he's annoyed by is he doesn't have his Java tree, because in my office he has a big tree with lots of toys on it that he can play on. And here, there's no Java tree. Here, there is just interesting things on the table for him to try to play with. So I'm going to stand up and put him up high on his ISR on, and he will maybe like that. There you go.
If he needs to go back, just tell me. I'll take it.
Yeah. He's fine. It's just if he gets too bored, we'll have to put him back where all of his other toys are and stuff. But usually when I'm writing during the day, he just likes to hang out eventually. Part of the problem is, because I keep moving my hands, he keeps saying interesting things. And if I'm sitting and typing, he's just like, oh, he's doing boring stuff. And then he'll play on his toys and things. So we'll see. I think that thought that people on stream might enjoy seeing my giant crazy chicken.
So far, my favorite comment regarding that is someone's just imagining a chicken chasing Kaladin.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Zelda chicken.
There's I've always had birds. My dad had a cockatiel when I was a kid. When I was in high school, I bought a lovebird named Hawk, who was great. He played Nintendo games with me, mostly sitting on my hands or on the controller while I was playing. But when I was in college, I got myself a cockatiel named Beaker, who was delightful. And so eventually, I persuaded my wife that when my kids were old enough that they were less likely to torment the bird, that I wanted to get another bird. And she said, okay, I think she probably thought I was going to get another lovebird or another cockatiel. And then she gets this giant velociraptor instead. But, you know, macaws are really fun. They are a blast. They are a handful, though, and they may not be for the inexperienced bird owner, I might say. They are kind of expensive, and they kind of are a handful. Like, the reason I can have Magellan is because he can spend every day with me while I'm working, and he can hang out on his Java trains around people. He's not alone, locked in a cage. He is hanging out. But that is also what makes him assume that he can come over and hang out on my head anytime he wants to, because that's what he's used to. You really want to... You do not like the IXR on today, huh? Oh, now you want to stay on it. Okay. Yeah. There you go.
So this next one is from Reddit user Lord Amonkira. Said, how did or has becoming a father changed how you write? Has there been a moment you had with them that helped change or direct you on something you were writing at the time?
Yeah, like... I have two sisters who are 10 years and 12 years younger than me, so I had some experience with kids growing up, but becoming a father really helped me understand, like, how clever kids are, and how fast they catch on. Like, anytime I see these days a depiction of, like, a preschooler or a kindergartner in a book, it feels like you can tell who's had a kid and who hasn't, because kindergartners are smart, right? Like, kindergartners, like, even like 3-year-olds, they're smarter than you think they are. Even though they're kids, so they're dumb, right? But they're smarter than you think, and the things they pick up on and the things they do and how fast they learn, that has definitely changed the way I approach writing kids in my books. Their sense of humor, right? Like, I did not get a kid's sense of humor at all until I had kids. And you can read in the Alcatraz books, basically it's my sense of humor in a kid's book. And Alcatraz tends to work poorly for some kids for that reason. Like, they're basically, they need to be kids who want a middle grade plot, but YA style humor. And knowing my kids and seeing what they laugh at and things like that, I totally understand dad jokes now, right? The reason that dads make dad jokes is because you have to emote for children to get them to understand something's a joke, and you have to really make it obvious so that they know it's okay to laugh at that joke, because unless it's physical humor or random humor, you know, they aren't going to get it. Why don't you play with your toy? Maybe, Joe, if you went and got him a new toy, we can try that. Emily knows where they are. They're just in his little box of toys we got him. And maybe he'll be interested in a new toy enough to hang out. And if not, we'll just send him back if he's too bored. Yeah, definitely changed that. I had a wonderful moment earlier this week. Just a really cool dad moment, right? Because Joel, my 12-year-old, has a writing contest at school. And he was really discouraged about trying the writing contest. He just didn't know if he wanted to do it or not. And, yeah, you want to come over. You just want to be doing whatever I'm doing. And you want to get on my head. I'll scratch. He came and he said, I don't know if I can do it. And so we talked about writing a story, what he wanted to write. He has a comic character he draws called Super Dodo, who is a dodo with superpowers. And I said, you know, the theme is discover your powers. You could do the origin story for Super Dodo, and he got really excited about it, and we talked about the parts of the story and stuff, and then I'm like, all right, go write. He's like, no, you're going to type and I'm going to talk, because you type fast, Dad. That's your job. And it turned into, he talked and I just typed, and he did a little 13-page story about the origin of the superpowers of Super Dodo, and it was really a great story. He did a fantastic job, and it was really fun to like do something with my son like that. So that's a proud dad moment. Super Dodo got his powers, by the way, because he read a lot of comic books. He wanted to go try to get powers, and so first he tried to go jump in a toxic waste barrel, and it just gave him a rash. And then he tried to get bit by a radioactive caterpillar, and the caterpillar wouldn't bite him and was too nice, and so he adopted as a pet and never got superpowers from that. And then he tried to build himself an Iron Man suit. Oh, you found the buttons. Yeah, that's what you wanted. I can't eat the buttons on my jacket. This is my authorial jacket. This is the one we wear to class. He built it out of cardboard boxes, and so, of course, it didn't work. But then the, he's going to love that, Joe. He loves the bird kebabs.
She was waiting at the door with it.
Oh, yeah? Oh, she's been watching. Yeah, let's put it on there and see. Put it up on the high one and see if he'll go on the ISR on and chew on it. Look at that. Oh, yeah, you are super excited. Bird kebabs. Yeah, get up here and we'll get it to you. Now he's going to want me to hold him. There you go. There you go. But it turns out the evil villain's plan was he was an evil penguin who created a laser that was going to take away all the flying power from birds that could fly and give it to all his minions who were penguins who couldn't fly. But he didn't know dodos existed and were other flightless birds, and so he turned on his laser and it gave Super Dodo all the powers instead. And so Super Dodo got powers and went up and fought him. So had a nice little twist ending even.
So this one is from Facebook, from Scott Maddock, and he wanted to ask you some Magic the Gathering questions.
Oh, well.
So there are
Magic the
3
Gathering
of them.
questions.
Yeah,
Let's
I figured
go.
you'd be happy about
Yes.
that. The first one is, what card or cards are you most excited about from Theros Beyond Death?
Yes, Theros Beyond Death. What am I most excited about?
And then while you're thinking of that, I can give the other 2.
Well, no.
Do you want one at a time?
Yeah, one at a time is probably better. Man, I always am looking for the goofy draft archetypes, right? Like that's what I want to draft, is random goofy draft archetypes. And so usually I have to watch the set played or play a little bit myself until I find the weird uncommon that I want to try to build something around. So, looking at it, Minotaur Tribal seems like it could be something you can't draft any other set that might be fun to try and draft in this one. But they've also built mechanics around escape and things like that. So some sort of goofy escape deck. I don't know if there's a specific card yet. Like I have to play with the set for a while before I decide what my favorite card is.
The next one is, can you give an example of Magic the Gathering being directly referenced or inspiring something in your books?
Wow, it's hard because I've been playing Magic since I discovered fantasy, right? Like I got into Magic when I was 18 and I discovered fantasy books when I was 15, so I guess it was a few years after, but it really kind of parallels my career wanting to be a writer along with Magic. And so it's hard for me to point to any one specific thing. Though, the fact that I ended up writing about a multiverse with people who travel between different worlds certainly has to have had some roots in playing Magic. I usually credit Asimov a little bit more for that, with combining robots books and the Foundation books. Actually, the real fun thing is people ask where Hoyd came from. The origin of Hoyd was me reading books when I was 16 and inserting my own character into the books. Like I would read an Anne McCaffrey book, and I guess I was just a budding writer or whatever, but I always liked imagining that there was some secret conspiracy that the characters in the book didn't know about, and there would be like a side character who would come on and do something and be like, that is secretly Hoyd. And he is up to this. So Hoyd actually started on Pern, but he was up to something suspicious behind the scenes. And I would imagine these great stories where he was traveling between the different books that I was reading and involved in some conspiracy. But the fact that I ended up, doing this sort of thing in my book, certainly I would think that magic had to have some influence on that. But I'm not sure if I can point to anything specific. Is the thing. I can point out that they did Sky Eels before I managed to get Sky Eels in, but I had written them by then. And so when Zendikar came out with Sky Eels, I'm like, ah! But magic is a hungry beast, as Mark Rosewater always says, and they, develop a new world every year or so. So there are a lot of things that magic's going to do. There's an old joke in animation that any story you come up with, The Simpsons will have already done. And I think South Park even did an episode called Simpsons Did It, because of this long-standing now sort of industry joke. Well, whatever you come up with for your fantasy world, magic's probably done it. So don't stress about that too much.
And their final question is, if you got to write another story in the Magic the Gathering canon, which character would you most want to write about?
Well, I would most want to write about Davriel, right? I would probably stick to the same one that I've already written about. But if Davriel is off the table, then Urza would probably be next on my list. I really like Urza because he is a really interesting character. The fact that he is not a 100%, he's fulfilling the Gandalf role in a lot of the early stories in the Magic universe, but he is definitely not the same altruistic person as Gandalf. He is a flawed individual with a lot of different motivations, and though his ultimate goal is one might call noble, it definitely is. One might not, you would actually say, at the end, Urza's got noble goals and stuff. There's a whole lot of rough edges in Urza that made for a really great character.
This one is from SebTub on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
They say, I've heard you say in other interviews that the Stormlight Archives was your go at a big, epic, everything's on the table fantasy series.
Yep.
But was there any particular series or religion or myths that inspired the story?
There's a whole bunch going on. You will find a whole lot of kind of Eastern shamanism, like Shinto or things like that, built around the idea of everything having a spread. That is one obvious influence. Another one is Plato's theory of the forms, right? From the Phaedrus, I believe it is. And this idea of different realms of existence directly became realmatic theory, which is the physical, spiritual, and cognitive of the books. He just had two. I ended up with three, but you can directly trace that to Plato. What else? A lot of the Alethi culture came from me wanting to build something based off of my research into the Mongol people, particularly during the time of Genghis Khan. This idea, but I took away the horses. Right, you don't have cavalries on Roshar to the extent that you would on Earth, and I thought that was really interesting because most people who base anything on the Mongols go with the whole horse lords thing, to the point that it's become a cliche. And so I'm like, what if I strip that away and I'm forced to look at other nuances of their culture? Particularly, I love the moment. I'm trying to remember what the name of the dynasty was when the Mongols conquered China and then basically became a dynasty in China and became, just basically another Chinese government. The Chinese were used to this idea that different people take over, the bureaucrats start serving them instead, and the big machine that is China keeps going with a new dynasty in charge. Now they're Mongols. That's really cool to me. And this idea of the Alethi is this famous infantry, this conquering infantry that also kind of, you see this in Dalinar, have to, in some way, settle down and rule an empire now that they have one. That's really cool to me. That's really interesting. And that's probably one of the most direct things you can point to Mongol culture for, is this idea. But also kind of, I feel like when people do a warrior culture in fantasy, too often, number one, they all feel alike in some ways. And I didn't like that. I wanted to do where you were reading through the eyes of people who were from what I thought was a nuanced, realistic warrior culture, and you didn't realize till you were part of the way through the book that you're like, this is a warrior culture. This is like Klingons or something like that. Like, these are the bad guys to a lot of people's eyes. but it's more nuanced. It's not, you know, one note, and so you've got a lot of variety in the culture and a lot of people to it and a lot of different opinions and perspectives that you may not even notice. Just like, you know, I love doing stuff like this. Like Elantris is a zombie story, right? The original premise for Elantris is a zombie story. And I hope that a lot of people don't even realize that, because I'm trying to strip away some of the trappings and use kind of some of the core concepts. And I like it when people get done with Elantris and they're like, wait, zombie story? Oh yeah! And I like it when people are reading, you know, about Lethi and they get to the end and like, oh, those are the Mongols? This is a warrior culture? I didn't even get that. I was through their eyes. I didn't understand that these are the scourge that everyone else is afraid of. Because I was seeing through their eyes and just seeing them as people. So that's a greater sort of world building and storytelling philosophy that I have. You know, the High Storms came from tidal pools. A lot of the ecology on Roshar was, what can I create something that looks like a tidal pool, or you know, a reef that's a reef is like a break for the waves and things like that, where things are kind of crashing into it a lot, and just kind of building this idea around that. So there's a few of them for you. There are tons more. Stormlight Archive is hard to point out one idea for. In fact, it's really hard to point at one idea for the plot premise at all, because telling people what the Way of Kings is about is really hard. Mistborn's easy, right? This is why I think it would probably be wise of us, if we're going to do any media, is to start with Mistborn, because we can pitch Mistborn, right? Hero failed, Gang of Thieves robbed the Dark Lord. Easy pitch. What is Way of Kings about? It's about this guy who's trained as a surgeon, and he finds out he's really good at killing people. He goes to war, but he doesn't actually get a fight. He gets put in these bridge crews, but it's really about him, you know, building a team of friends among these people in this terrible situation. But it's actually about restoring lost orders of knights from long ago. But it's actually about the impending war that they were set up to fight, these knights, but that they told everyone that they won, but they really didn't win, but they kind of did. It just gets really convoluted. It is hard to explain what the Way of Kings is about. This is why the Way of Kings has 3 prologues. Don't do that, by the way. Yeah. 1 prologue is bad enough. You don't need 3. Unless you're writing Way of Kings. Then it was totally necessary.
So there. Oh boy.
Magellan, what are you doing?
You okay, dude?
Yeah, he's fine. Okay. What are you doing? Were you trying to get down to your come over here. Were you trying to get down to your bird Bob again? And you just
I'm surrounded by pens.
He's now surrounded by pens. Now he's gonna wander around the floor because he's on the floor. Oh no, he's gonna come over here. Come here, bud. Were you scared by that? Yeah?
And Jordan Davis says, this is what you get when you let dragons into your office.
Yes. Look, Joe got you a pecan. Ooh, is that, yeah. Ooh. That'll make up for falling off. He is still clipped from the breeders. I will flight train him once he gets over the clipping he came from. And it's a very light clip. He can glide pretty well. But he doesn't fly yet. We are bracing ourselves for when he can, because he is going to be very quick to come over and bother us. I'm sure once he can fly. Here, we'll put this on here, your bird kebab, and then you can be down by the stuff we're doing, and you can eat your bird kebab. See? There it is. Ooh, you love these things. Alright, there you go. Mm-hmm.
So we have 2 questions that are similar related.
Yeah?
From Katrine Euler and Emily Fail. They want to know what inspired Lopen and Lift.
So Lopen, what inspired Lopen? So, a couple things inspired Lopen. The first and kind of most important thing that inspired Lopen is I knew Bridge 4 needed more light, right? Like, it needed somebody who just refused to be beaten down at all. because things were so dark in the Bridge 4 sequences, I knew I needed to add in somebody who just had a different personality. And I developed Lopen around that idea. Lopen is the guy that's going to be shoved into hell and be like, hey guys, what's going on? Wow, it's kind of hot here, huh? Well, we'll deal with that. Like, just refuses to let it get him down. The Herdazians in general came from, look, you have your bird kebab now. What? You need scratches still? Or what? It came in general from me wanting to kind of reach to other cultures that aren't often seen in fantasy novels for some of my inspirations. So a few of the Herdazian inspirations come from Hispanic culture. I think that's probably pretty obvious. But just not something that you see a lot in epic fantasy for whatever reason. Like, if people are writing epic fantasy and they're reaching for cultures to base things on, they're usually going to go to Europe or to Asia, right? You're going to see a lot of Japan and China. You're going to see a lot of Germany. You're going to see a lot of classical Europe, Hellenistic, things like that. You'll occasionally see the Persians because of like the Achaemenid Persian inspirations and things like that. Didn't we have a Cyrus the Not So Great earlier? Was that was the Persians, right? Yeah. So, but you don't see... You don't see Mexicans, right? You don't see South Americans and things, and there's a lot of really interesting things to go there. Now, it strays into dangerous areas when you're just like, I'm going to lift this culture wholesale and plop it in your book, which is dangerous because you risk really misrepresenting that culture, appropriate it and things like that. But I think where fantasy comes from is going and actually doing deep dives into Earth's history and looking for inspirations for cultures. And I spent, with the Herdazians, I spent a lot of time in that direction because I was already reading on some of that for Arithmetist. Where did Lift come from? So one of the things that I did when I was developing all of the Knights Radiant was I knew that I wanted the Knights Radiant to come from a variety of walks of life and a variety of ages. This was especially important because I knew that some of my central characters were going to be around the same age and come from very similar cultures. And so I knew when I was developing them I was going to need someone like Lift. I wanted a tween who became a Knight Radiant, right? Like that was the thing. Who can be my tween? Who's going to be the older, the person in their 60s or 70s who becomes a Knight Radiant? Who's going to be the tween who becomes a Knight Radiant? What? You don't want to be scratched. You just want to be on camera. That's all you want, is you're annoyed that you're not on camera. Yeah. You're going to walk on people's copies of The Way of Kings, you're going to bite them, and then they're going to return them and be like, why are you chewing on our books, Brandon? Yeah, come on.
I'm ready for the comments to come in for that.
Yeah. They're all like, have him bite mine, have him bite mine. That was me taking away his button, if you heard that screech. He is really mad that I'm not letting him have the button.
Jory wants one of those.
Jory wants one?
Yeah.
Of course Jory does.
Of course he does.
Jory, you're in this book.
Oh.
You're in the new one. I found a place for you. He's in the previous one too, so that's not as surprising a thing, but come on.
Mark wants one bitten too.
Yeah, of course Mark does. Yeah.
Someone wants to know how much you would charge for a Brandon bit copy.
Was that also Jory?
No. You would. I know what you want to do. You want to clone me. Come on.
And Jory is very excited, apparently, about being in the next book. He just said what?
Okay. Yeah. Joe's got pecans. Come on.
And Brandon, we're a little over 2 hours. Are you still good doing
Yeah, I'm
this?
still good.
Okay.
If people are still good, I'm still
We're
good.
still at 1,700 people watching.
Okay. So, yeah, we may have to send Jello back in a little bit because he really wants my buttons.
I really wish it would let me film in landscape. People really want to see them, but you just can't fit both.
You can't fit. You can't see him over here.
We'd have half of you.
You have half of me.
Yeah. Right now we have all of you, but if we moved it over, we'd have half of
If you
you.
move it over, you'd have half of Magellan. All right. So, anyway, let's go on with questions.
Okay.
And we'll let you feed him a few more pecans, Joe, and see if that.
So you've had several questions asking you what you're reading now, what you've read recently, books that you would recommend.
So recently, I read Kingdom of Liars by Nick Martell, which is a debut that Joshua picked up, and it's not coming out for another year. It was really good. I think you guys will like it. It's kind of it's an epic fantasy, but it's got a lot of political intrigue. It's got an interesting world with a destroyed moon that is sending down meteors onto the planet and stuff like that, and just some really cool world building aspects and stuff like that. So yeah, look out for that one next summer. Most recently, we had Victoria Schwab on writing excuses for one of next year's guests, and she was brilliant. Like, how have I not read any of her books? Because she, like, all the stuff, like she said, was very much like, made me think that she and I think very similar in our world building and storytelling. And so I picked up her first book and I'm reading that, and I would recommend it. It is good. So, Darker Shaded Magic, is that what it's called? Yeah, Darker Shaded Magic. I'm reading that one. Yeah, because she writes under two names. She has her fantasies and her YAs. So, yeah.
And then Lightning Captured wants to know if there's anything you can share about your books for TV, movies, anything that...
Boy, not a lot, right? Like, there's just not really any motion. I wish there were. Like, I'm excited for Dark One with Joe Strudinsky. He just makes really good television. But really, there's nothing more to announce than that, right? That I got to go. It was really fun to go to Hollywood and pitch with Joe. If you don't know Joe Strudinsky, he's the showrunner on Babylon 5 and the creator of it. He's also done a bunch of other stuff like Sense8. He was involved in, and he's written a lot of comics and stuff like that. Just a really fascinating guy. But I mean, there's not really any emotion on that. We were really close on Snapshot, and then I haven't heard anything from them for a while, so I don't know. I think we have new deals in the works for both Alcatraz and Skyward, though I can't announce those yet because I don't think they've been officially done, but at least there are deals in the works for both of those. But, I mean, you can go read my big, huge spiel about movies last year's State of the Sanderson, or 2 years ago, or a year ago, but 2 years ago, where I talk about it. Nothing has really made any progress lately. This is why I, in this year's State of the Sanderson, basically said, I'm to the point where I'm realizing that if I want to do anything, I probably have to do it myself, right? Right, like I may have to just sit down and write screenplays and go find directors myself and see if that works, but historically that's, very hard to do, and I am not an experienced screenwriter. I've written one screenplay in my life, and it was kind of bad. So who knows? I'm moving into the stage where I'm kind of starting my own production company, and I am taking the rights and just kind of leaving them in the production company rather than selling them off with the hope that whoever buys them will make it, because so far no one's done any of that. I hear Witcher is great. I haven't watched it yet, but the fact that it's a really good sign that there is a good fantasy show out that is not Game of Thrones, right? Because everyone thought, well, this could only happen once, but if it is proven by that, and hopefully by Wheel of Time, when it is ready, hopefully those will prove that fantasy is viable not just as Game of Thrones, which will help the rest of us get a bunch of stuff done. So thumbs up to Does anyone know, is it Henry Cavill or Henry Cavill?
I think it's Cavill.
Cavill? Thumbs up to Henry Cavill for really pushing for The Witcher to get done and doing it right. Like, we probably, if the rest of this all takes off and stuff, we'll owe a whole bunch to him pushing to get that Witcher show made. So, and I'm not just saying this because he tweeted a nice picture of him reading Oathbringer, but I am partially saying it because he tweeted a nice picture of himself reading Oathbringer.
The next one's from Aiden Dunning. He says, "Hi, Brandon. I'm about to start reading my first book of yours, The Way of Kings, and I'm going in blind.
Okay.
Should I be scared?"
Yeah, Way of Kings. So here's the thing. You gotta trust me on Way of Kings, which is why I usually don't recommend it first. It is my best series, and so it is, in some ways, the best place to start, but it's also the hardest, right? Like, it has 3 prologues. You're not going to get a character who is actually a main character of the story until the 4th scene you read. There's a prelude, a prologue, and a chapter 1, but chapter 1's secretly a 3rd prologue. And so, right, and then, like, I'm going to give you that character, and then another one. So it's like the first 5 sequences are like 5 different characters. It's a really strange world. It's a long book, and if people put down Way of Kings, they put it down in the first 11 chapters, and that is okay. It is not for everyone, definitely, but it is the book that, if you trust me, and if you keep reading it, you are
More special copies.
More special copies. We'll just give him to Emily, and we'll let Emily take him back. So, everyone, here's the arm of my wife. Magellan really likes her. So, we will say bye-bye to Magellan. He's just getting cuddles from Emily right now, because he's like, what are all these strange people, and why is no one paying attention to me? And why am I left on the perch when Brandon is doing interesting things with stuff that I can see that obviously must taste good, because he keeps doing stuff with them. So yeah. Bye-bye, Magellan.
So this next one's from J. Mike Taylor.
J. Mike Taylor.
It says, "Brandon,
Yeah.
do you hate Moash as much as the rest of us?"
Yes, but, so here's the thing. This goes into, like, how does it feel to kill characters, or how does it feel to do things like this? I know way ahead of time what path characters are going down. And I more let them go the directions that they want to go. And it's less about, me killing characters, or me making a character do this thing or that thing, and more this kind of grand plan, and also knowing ahead of time. So that's a long way of saying, I like when characters provoke strong reactions. It is what I do intentionally. What has happened with Moash is not an accident. It was designed deliberately into the stories, and I am pleased with how it is going. And so, yes and no. Do you know what I mean? Like, it takes a lot of work to get someone like Moash to work, and I feel like he is working the way I want him to, so I'm also very pleased. Yes and no is the answer to you there.
This next one's from Rob Santos. They say, if you could send one of your own books back in time, and I know you love time travel questions, back in time to your 15-year-old self, which of them would you have enjoyed the most, with no idea who actually wrote it?
Right, yeah. Caveat of, don't mess with the time stream. But, what would I have enjoyed the most? Depends on the age you catch me at, but my guess is Mistborn. That would be my guess. Just because it is faster paced, and because it comes to a conclusion, like it is what other series do in a whole series, I tried to do in one book. That was one of the premises for it. And I think it would have been very surprising to me as a young man reading fantasy for that to work. So.
Okay. Another one from Mario Zakal. He says, we know heist movies like Sneakers were inspiration for Mistborn. Are there other genres or specific movies, TV shows that inspire you and that you would want to give a fantasy sci-fi twist?
So I've done most of the ones that I've thought of. I'm still waiting for the right place to do Count of Monte Cristo. I think that is a plot archetype that is not done quite as often and can lend to some really interesting storytelling. And so you can be on the watch out for when I find the place to use that. I actually know exactly where it's going to go, but I'm not going to tell you. So there's that one. There's what else? I mean, I've used the Underdog Sports team. I have used the get the team together kind of Avengers style thing. There are just so many plot archetypes out there that I'm watching for. So yeah, I'll just tell you that. Watch for the kind of Count of Monte Cristo style of story, because I have a really interesting take on it. And if you're looking for other examples of this, obviously Skyward is based on the boy gets a dragon egg story, but turned on its head to a different style.
This next one's from Kim Jensen, and it's a Hoyd question, so this should make a lot of the people watching happy. Says, does Hoyd have any rules, self-imposed or otherwise, about how much he can interfere with what is going on whatever planet he is currently on? And why does he take such an active part on Roshar compared to the other planets he has visited?
So, Hoyd has a few rules of thumb, but he does not have the same rules that the shards have to follow, which is basically one of the big points that makes Hoyd do what he does. He has to watch out because drawing their attention at the wrong time can be very dangerous. But if that's not necessarily a rule, it's just more of a be careful. So kind of he's defined by the fact that he doesn't have to follow the rules. And he's also defined by the fact that he intervenes when a lot of others think that one should not intervene, as made evident by the chastisement he receives from Frost. So I would say no and yes. There are some weird limitations on him relating to things in his past that you will find out about eventually. But those are not really about intervening. Why Roshar and more than others? There are a couple of reasons for this. One is the way he is intervening on Roshar is something that is directly involving the main characters of the book I'm writing. He actually has done a lot on other planets as well. You just haven't seen it because he hasn't been as involved with the main characters. Why is he involved in the main characters? Well, he trying to get to be a Knight Radiant, and he wants to be involved with the people who are becoming Knights Radiant, because he wants to figure out how that magic works, and specifically how you can get off-world with it, which is the real trick on Roshar. And so he, in this specific instance, is really involved with those characters because of that reason. A lot of the other places he will go, the magic is already extant, and it's not like Roshar where the magic has not been around for a while, and so he is kind of by necessity more involved in the plot. So, there you go.
This is from Rebecca Jensen. When did you know you wanted to be a writer? When did you realize that you were actually really good at writing? And what did it feel like the first time it became clear to other people, I guess they loved your stories and couldn't wait for more? So
I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was a teenager after discovering fantasy novels from the story I told earlier in the stream. That was a big moment for me. When I tried writing my first book and I really enjoyed it. The way it engaged me was on a level of nothing I'd ever experienced before. And so that's when I decided I wanted to do that. I had another decision point after serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Korea and coming back. That's when I made that year as the decision that I was going to become an English major and really try to do this for my job. Because my freshman year, before my mission, had been, it was in chemistry and I just did not enjoy it at all. It was partially, I got mediocre grades in it, despite trying. I tried really hard the second semester. Didn't try as hard the first semester. That's how college goes sometimes. First semester at college can take us a bit by surprise. I legitimately tried and didn't find I was particularly good at it. Mostly like the math. It's not that I'm bad at math, it's just that don't find it interesting. I don't find doing the same problems over and over again with different numbers to be engaging. Maybe it doesn't engage anyone, and that's part of the point is you have to learn to do this. And maybe if I kept going, I would have found the parts of science that I really enjoy, taking more of my time. But that freshman year, I didn't like it, but I loved writing. So another big decision point was when I just said, I'm going to give this a try. I didn't know at the time that a lot of authors suggest not being an English major, but instead majoring in something you find really interesting and using that to inform your writing. That is good advice. The advantage of being an English major in college is that you can take creative writing classes as part of your course load, and the work you theoretically are already doing, writing stories, then becomes your homework, so it's just a little bit easier that way. But yeah, there's a second half of this question that's interesting. What was it?
And when did it become clear to other people?
Yeah. So I started working on a magazine at BYU called Leading Edge, which is what we call a semi-prozine. Semi-prozine means that it pays money to people who submit stories, but they aren't pro rates. So it's not an actual professional magazine, but it's also not a completely amateur magazine in that it does pay rates to people who submit and get their stories accepted. And it mostly exists to train aspiring writers and editors about publishing this magazine on campus. Wonderful experience. If you happen to have a campus magazine like that, I highly recommend going and becoming part of that community, because learning about the publishing side, even in a semi-pro way from behind the scenes, is really helpful to a writer. But regardless, by the time I was working on the magazine, people started to learn who I was. I've been going for a little while. I had been writing books for several years at that point, and I started sharing the books with people. I started letting them read the novels. This happened right around book number 5, so the one I wrote before Elantris, and then extended up through if you call it, there's a golden age of my unpublished career where I was writing pretty good stuff that is of the style that I would become eventually writing. That was all stuff that became Cosmere as I figured it out. That was that period where I wrote Elantris, Dragonsteel, and White Sand. And right then is when I was making a lot of friends at the magazine, and I was sharing the books with them for the first time in my life. I was less nervous about that and learning to solicit feedback, and people started sharing the books with their friends, and their friends started reading them and asking for sequels, and people I hadn't met were coming up to me and saying, "Oh yeah, you're the writer guy. When do I get my sequel to this? That book was really good." That's when I started to get a clue, right? I wasn't completely confident yet. Now that I have hindsight and can look back, that's not the sort of thing that happens if your writing's bad. If you're a brand new writer, you give your book to people, you often will find that they don't actually finish it. And if they do, it's really only your friends who finish it. But this, we had people talking theories already. We had people, passing the books around. I would give them to someone, and they'd come back, and 30 people had read the book. And because I had people sign the front when they read it, and when they would write their comments, then I would know who it was. And there were just lists of names on the covers of these of people I didn't know. That was when I started to figure it out and get pretty confident in my writing. That's why when none of those books sold, it was really discouraging, because I had thought that I was getting there. I was at the pro level. I had thought it's happening, and then it didn't, and the books didn't sell, and I had this whole kind of third era, if you call it. There's like 3 eras in my unpublished career. There's the I write books and I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm not sharing them with anyone. And then there's the Cosmere era, and then there's the I'm writing books to market and they're failing era. And I entered that writing books to the market and they're failing era after all of this, and that's when my confidence started to waver, which I talked about earlier in the stream.
We have a couple of semi-related religious questions regarding religions in your book.
Okay.
So the first one is, how has creating various religions for your books interacted with your faith? Has it changed or challenged it? And the second one was, as a religious man, how do you think writing characters like Sazed has affected your faith?
Yeah, those are great questions. So definitely has changed the way that I interact with religion and challenged it in good ways, right? Like, sometimes those of us who are religious like to hold up evidence to prove that we're right. And the more I've written, the more I've realized that's a bad method to try to convert someone. Like in the LDS faith. No offense to anyone who's used this. I know general authorities have used this. But pointing at the Book of Mormon and saying, look at this book that was written by by a young man in his late teens. Could any young man have done that? Well, maybe, yeah, right? Like, this is the wrong way to prove religion, in my opinion, right? Like it's conceivable. I think it would have been really hard. I don't think that I could have done it, but having become a writer and met a lot of writers, I think there's somebody who could have, right? Like, that's a bad proof. Because if you say that and then you find someone who could do it, then suddenly, your whole argument is destroyed. The reason that I have faith is that I believe I have a personal connection with deity, who has let me feel in my heart through something we call the Spirit that he is real and that there are certain things he wants me to do. That is why I have faith. And that I consider a stronger foundation than banking on, some sort of physical proof, if that makes sense. Let spiritual things, things like Christ said, render unto Caesar what Caesar is due. I'm not quoting that right, I'm sorry. So yeah, that's one aspect of it. It is really, like, one of the reasons I love writing is I love seeing through the eyes of people different from myself. And I like really trying to write their viewpoints the best I can, to challenge myself. Number one, can I do it? Number two, is this way of thinking better than mine, right? And I love what that does to me, because it forces me to ask myself those questions. It forces me to challenge what I believe and what I see and what I do. And I feel that challenges in both intellectual and spiritual pursuits are for the best, because a faith should be able to withstand common challenges and rational challenges, and if it can't, then maybe that's a sign that something is wrong. And so, but things that that stand to the challenges, I think proves their strength. This is why I think it's important to have multiple perspectives in my books. So writing someone like Sazed or Yasna, or even, Kaladin, or Hrathen, or any of these characters who are interacting with the divine or the spiritual or with faith in an interesting way, have changed the way that my own faith operates and the way that I work, certainly. I think all for the better. That's part of why I do it. But, there's just kind of one of my armchair answers to you on that sort of thing.
The next one is from Dakota Clemens. It says, what was your biggest oh crap moment when you were editing a book? For example, paragraph out of order or a super broken lore logic order.
Oh man, what was the biggest one on those? We have these all the time. Usually it's when Peter and Karen and the writing group and people are reading the book and say, hey, what about this? And you're like, I didn't think of that at all. What about that? Timeline problems can always be very interesting in that, where they're like, hey, Brandon, there's no physical way for this person to get to this place that you said that they are going to go. What do we do? And you have it like an, oh crap, what do I do? This happened in Oathbringer, where it's like, hey, you're having these characters move this far in Shadesmar. It's physically impossible in the amount of time you've developed. And so you have to go back and be like, I guess we have to change the timeline, which reconstructs the whole book and gives more time to this thing to happen. And it's a lot of work, and it's really frustrating. And so it's less an oh crap unless it gets published, and then there's a big problem in it. Then you're like, oh crap. More it's like, oh no, this is going to cause a lot of work. I'm going to have to do so much revisions to make the timeline actually work in this book and that sort of thing. I'm trying to remember what the kind of, if there have been any really big oh crap when I've been writing or when I've had something come out and be published. And I think I've managed to avoid most of the big ones. And if something does go wrong, and it can't really be logically explained in any way in the books, we just say this was wrong, and then we fix it in a future revision. I am not perfect, I'm afraid, guys, and particularly when it comes to continuity and timeline stuff. When I'm writing a rough draft, I'm worried so little about that, because getting the character arcs down and the plot sequences to come together is really hard, and that's the part that engages me the most. And so when I have a rough draft, that's when I have to sit down and say, all right, now does this actually all logically work? And you might say, Brandon, why don't you do that ahead of time? That would be great, but even somebody like myself who uses a lot of outlines changes a ton while we're writing, and my outlines are not really understandable to anyone else. So giving them to my team early and having them try to figure out all these problems often just doesn't work as well as I hope it would. Oh, you gonna come fix my hair or something?
Of course.
Oh,
Now special guest Emily.
Special guest Emily fixing my hair.
No, I just thought I'd come and say hello and see if people have any questions for me.
Oh yeah,
Should we grab a chair?
questions for Emily.
And I bribed the children with screen time so they won't come in and help.
Somebody want to grab a chair?
But I am going to fix
I bet they would like the children to come in and help us.
Maybe we'll let them come and say hi.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a few minutes delay.
Yeah.
So maybe I give Brandon
Yeah,
one more question, and then we'll get questions
You guys
from
can,
Emily.
can hit
And tell
Emily
me-
up with questions.
Tell me where you want me to sit or whatever.
Yeah, do we want to move the camera back a little bit for
Yep, I will do that.
Emily being in?
People are responding really well. They enjoy it.
Emily is, by the way, what she is not only my lovely and wonderful wife, she's the business manager of our business. So she handles like all the employees, all the taxes, all the government stuff that we have to do, all of that. All the really fun stuff.
Really fun stuff.
Yes, she married me, and then I'm like, guess what you're gonna do? It wasn't like that. It kind of grew organically, but
And I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it. So, I mean, there are lots of people who would be better at it than me, but I like it, and I'm kind of invested in it, so it's fun.
So the first one is Emily, as the true author of Stormlight, how do you feel about your spotlight being stolen by your husband?
There's no way I could ever have written a Stormlight.
You could have. You just would need 10 years of practice,
Yeah,
right?
without 10 years of practice.
10 years of practice.
I enjoy reading them as much as everyone else does.
Yeah.
I joke, and there's a part of me that's serious, that I wish I had thought in the early part of my career to pick some model that's really good with people to be the author of the books, to go on tour
And
for
use
me.
a female pseudonym.
And use like a female, like we always joke about my sister Jane, who's actually Adam's wife, who isn't around, is she?
She is on the feed.
At
least she's been on it a little bit.
Okay, well, Jane, say hello to everyone. I joke, Jane is like super personable and super nice and super intelligent and articulate, and also, yes, just everyone loves Jane. She would have been the best person to send on tour to be the author of these books. And then I could have stayed home and written. And would
tried to convince me to do that once, but I was like, one of us has to take care of the children.
So.
The first serious question is, Emily, what is your personal favorite of Brandon's books?
Of Brandon's books? That's hard. I kind of have a special place in my heart for Warbreaker, because Brandon started writing that after we met, and he was writing it while we were dating and engaged and first married.
And on our honeymoon.
And on our honeymoon. Yes. I was reading a book while he was writing a book, so it's all good. Partly too because he was doing the experiment of putting it online. As he wrote it, he would send it to me to make sure there weren't any huge, horrible, glaring errors, and I would kind of read through it. And so for the first time, I was getting Brandon books right after he'd written them. And that was really fascinating. It was really fun to see, hey, wait a second, this conversation that these characters are having was inspired by a conversation that we had last week. This is the kind of thing that we've talked about. And so that was really fun. So that book has a special place in my heart for that reason. I think, honestly, my favorite book is the last one that has come out. I always think, I read Way of Kings and was like, this is amazing. How can we possibly do better than this? And then I read the next one and was like, he did. This is amazing too. And so I do really love Stormlight Archive.
But you have to read them when they're bad.
That is true. Maybe that's why I think they're so amazing. I read them when they're bad, and then I read them again when they're all cleaned up. And
we're in the middle of Stormlight 4 right now in writing group, and it's bad. It's got so many problems. They're not huge fundamental problems, but they are big problems.
Many are curious if you do any creative writing of your own.
I did at one point. I was an English teacher, and I kind of went into English with the... Okay, honestly, it's because I didn't know anything else to choose as a major that I was actually good at, because I just loved reading all the time. I had aspirations in that direction, but I haven't written anything for a long time. Maybe I will when children aren't quite so demanding. It is hard, honestly, to be in this environment and not want to write, because it's so much fun to see books getting written and go to writing group and read the things people are coming up with. And
we have a really good writing group full of really good authors.
Yeah.
Kathy, write your book.
So, at some point, I'm going to write something, I know. But now's not the right time. Being a business manager and a mom, and sometimes a single parent when Brandon's gone, is a lot of work. So.
Yeah. Going on tour for months at a time is hard on me, but it's also hard on everyone else, too.
Mm-hmm.
So a follow-up question to the first is, which of Brandon's books did you like least or were the biggest critic of?
Ooh. Oh boy, what would that be? Which one didn't you like?
I wasn't super fond of Snapshot, honestly.
Snapshot's a little brutal for Emily. Yeah, that's not...
It's, well, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's a bit...
I could have guessed that, yeah.
Some of the fight scenes in Mistborn are a bit too violent for me, too.
Dreamer, you didn't particularly like Dreamer, did you? You were okay with Dreamer?
I was okay with Dreamer. Perfect State was kind of not my favorite.
Yeah?
But, I don't know. A lot of people have a hard time with Alcatraz, and I love Alcatraz. I think it's kind of a love it or hate it.
Yes, it's definitely a
and
love
I'm
it
in
or
the love
hate
it
it.
camp for
So,
Alcatraz.
yeah.
So.
Mark Bethy Lingard wants to know if you've been told the ending of Stormlight.
Yeah,
You've told me a couple of things that I asked. I'll ask, a specific question, and Brandon will say, "Do you really want to know?" And then I'll be like, "No, I don't. Don't tell me." There have been times when I said, "Yes, I need to know this one particular thing," and you've told me. But
you know the big ending of 10, right?
I know the big ending.
Yeah,
of 10,
you know the big ending of 10.
But sometimes I don't want to know because it's so much more fun to read the books and be surprised. It's still fun when you know things and then you kind of figure out how they happen. But for the most part, I'd rather experience it after you've written it.
What are some of your favorite books and authors?
I've been reading Victoria Schwab recently and really like her stuff. Growing up, Robin McKinley was my favorite author ever. The Blue Sword I always point to as my favorite book. It was one that I read in junior high and then I would read like every single year after that.
It holds up. It's a good book.
Yeah, it does. It holds up. It's a good book. I like the Anne McCaffrey books. I like the Terry Brooks books. Recently I've read... What did I read recently?
Let's see.
I read some Tamora Pierce, a new one by her.
Yep. We're always reading some Pratchett.
Yes.
You haven't read Good Omens yet, though. You watched the show with me.
Yeah, I watched the show, but I haven't read the Good Omens. I'll have to read that one at some point. You introduced me to Pratchett, and I love it. I've devoured all of them.
What are your last 3 book group books?
I think that I have to get my phone and look at it.
Yeah.
We end up reading a lot of nonfiction in book group, which is a good thing for me because I think otherwise I wouldn't read any nonfiction. And it kind of gets me to read some things that are a little bit out of my interest sometimes, and it's been surprising how good they are. But I have to go look at my list and see.
Non-fiction-wise, if you guys haven't read Ed Catmull's Pixar retrospective, Creativity Inc., it's a great book, and a good book for someone who's a business manager, which is why I think you still ought to read that one.
I need to read that one. I do like reading business books occasionally. There's some good stuff out there.
So Jory wants to know Crowley or Aziraphale.
Crowley, definitely.
Yeah, who picks Aziraphale, right? Like, seriously.
I'm sure there are people who like Aziraphale, but I mean, Crowley.
Well, the performance was so good.
The performances on both of those are amazing.
Yeah,
The best moment is when they're, at some point, not to give spoilers, the actors are doing each other's character, and it's so good. Like, you can really see someone's acting chops when they do that.
Yeah, when they're impersonating someone else.
And it's just like a casual little short thing that's just like these two masters showing off their ability in a way that,
People are wanting to know, this is a question for both of you, how you're enjoying The Mandalorian. Obviously spoiler-free.
So, yeah, we are on, we did episode 5, right?
Yeah,
so we have 3 left.
5. The guns thing was the last one that we watched. So.
Yep.
And it's been really fun. Honestly, it's been fun to watch something with our kids that they're interested enough in to actually sit still for a little while.
Dallin and Oliver, who are 10 and 7, right?
Yeah.
Every time Baby Yoda comes on, they go, "Yay!" Just like that. Just in sync with one another, in tune.
Yes. It's been fun. I'm curious to see what they do with the last. What, are there 8?
There's 8. Yeah.
So we've got 3 left. Yeah, I'm curious to see what they do with them.
So I really liked the first 3 episodes, which tell a cohesive story. This is something that's more a me thing. I like less episodic and more cohesion. So I liked episodes 4 and 5 less.
Yeah.
Episodes 1, 2, and 3 I loved. They were they were probably the best Star Wars I've seen since like original. Right? Like they just the right amount of fan service and not really great side characters. Like the assassin robot, it was just really well done, and very tropey, but excellent use of the tropes. Like,
well done.
You judge something based on what it's trying to do. At least that's what I try to do: is judge it. What is it attempting to do, and how well does it do this, and how well do I like what they're attempting to do? And Mandalorian, those first 3 episodes I just really liked. And the last 2, I've just, they're okay.
That's kind of how I felt as well. It's been amazing to see how much the actor or actors can emote while wearing, the helmet and all of the armor and everything. It's been interesting.
I shouldn't say the best because there are some Force Awakens moments that are really great. Like the fight in the snow at the end of that movie is so good. So there's some stuff I really like about the Force Awakens also. But Mandalorian,
it's been really fun.
It's been really great. I've been happy to watch it.
So no spoilers for the last 3 episodes on any comments.
Emily, they want to know what the nerdiest thing Brandon has done for you.
Ooh.
Oh. Tell them about the dice.
The dice? Yeah, the dice is way nerdy. They'll love that.
So, was it the first?
It was our first Valentine's Day.
When it was.
We were dating but not engaged.
Yeah, it was right before we got engaged.
We started dating, we did on our first dates in November. We were a couple by January.
Yeah.
We got engaged in March. Right? On St.
So
Patrick's
this
Day?
was February. Was before we were engaged. And we were we were both 30, so... And in Provo, Utah, that's really old
we
to
were
be
so old.
single.
Oh.
So we were kind of, you don't date someone for very long before you start thinking about, could I marry this person or not? And I was still kind of freaked out by the whole idea. And Brandon knew that. And so for Valentine's Day, he pulls out a jewelry box. And I was kind of like, and then he opened it up, and there was a 20?
20.
A 20-sided die in there.
A red one,
A red
Valentine's Day.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did that just to see my face. He did actually give me. Did you give me a necklace then?
Yeah, there's a necklace underneath.
There's a necklace underneath it. But, and then every Valentine's Day after, for several years, he gave me red dice.
Until she had a full set of
So I
nerd
had a full
dice.
set of nerd dice. Which is pretty fun, actually.
You were not a gamer, and still
No,
really are not a gamer.
I do actually know now
Yes.
the different kinds of dice, but
Yeah.
I'm not a gamer.
Yeah, that moment of panic in your eyes was just...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is from Chelsea Flake Mortensen. It's, what advice do you have for marrying a writer?
Oh. It's a wild ride. I think it's different because all writers' careers are different and writing styles are different. But I think being married to anyone who makes their living in a creative way, you have to communicate well. Like, I don't want to get in the way of Brandon's creative process, but at the same time, it's important that he be a husband and a father and all of those things too. So figuring out, and we kind of had to figure out beforehand, this is family time, this is us time, this is writing time. So figuring out a balance that works and then making it explicit. So you say, this will be us time, this will be writing time, this will be family time. That makes a big difference. I think you kind of have to decide what your role is as far as critique person too. I know spouses of writers who don't read their spouse's work at all, and their spouse doesn't want them to. I would be really sad if Brandon didn't let me read his books because I love them. And some people really want their spouse to read it and actually give them, maybe their spouse is their foremost critique person and they want them to give them hard, critical, be mean kind of thing or be honest. And then some would be like, no, I need you to be the cheerleader. I need you to be the person who tells me the good. There are other people that will tell me what's wrong. You tell me what's good about it.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
There's nothing wrong with wanting only support from your spouse rather than criticism. Don't feel guilty that you suddenly don't want, you're like, I'm not willing to listen to feedback because I want, you are allowed a cheerleader.
Yes.
If you want one.
And I think that's important to kind of figure out between the two of you, what does your spouse need you to do? And are you okay with that? I would hate to, obviously I would never lie and say, oh yes, this is wonderful, if it weren't. but I am more I would have a hard time trying to focus on the critical and being the one to find the problems. That's not the way I am, and that's not the way I read. So that's a big thing. It's hard to know too because so many creative fields. Is it your full-time gig or is it a side thing? And I think it's a lot more difficult if you have a spouse who is working a full-time job and also trying to do a creative pursuit. I mean, we are lucky in that it is his full-time gig, and so
Right, and by the time we met, I had sold a book.
Yeah.
So.
And so I think it would have been different if we kind of worked into it.
I wasn't earning any money.
That's true.
Emily,
I still had to teach for the first 2 years of our marriage.
That lucrative public school teacher money is what made me able to be a writer in this year. So.
But I think clear communication, and I think also I keep saying we need to have it like a spouses of creative people support group. I actually got some really good tips from some. I think Gail Haldeman, I think was one of them. Some others. Also, I think who else I've talked to. I've talked to other spouses of creative people, and trying to figure out what questions to ask, and you know, when you do end up doing it as your business, we just kind of figured it out by the seat of our pants, sometimes to our detriment. But it's nice to have somebody to ask. So find other people who are in a similar situation and ask questions.
Yeah. I do a long kind of explanation of some of the things Emily and I figured out in my lectures this year, which we are recording. So in the first one, I talk about that. That should go up. I'm not sure when, but
probably sometime next week.
Sometime next week. So you can watch that lecture, and I'll talk about it later. They want to know who your favorite character of Brandon's is.
Oh, favorite character of Brandon's.
Stick.
No. I really like Lift. I'm enjoying Yasna quite a bit.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of Yasna in these early books, though, unfortunately. There's a couple Yasna viewpoints in the new book, so that's good.
Yeah.
And you'll get a little Yasna, but you really aren't going to get a lot of Yasna for a while.
Yeah. I kind of think it's hard because it's like whichever one I happen to be reading at the time is my favorite.
So what Robert Jordan said when someone asked him who his favorite character was, is whoever I'm writing right now.
It's kind of true though. Whoever I'm reading right now, I'm like, oh, I love this character. I read a Kaladin chapter, I'm like, oh, I love Kaladin. And I read a Dalinar chapter. And
did you say who your least favorite character was?
My least favorite character? Ooh. Can I choose Padden Fane?
Padden Fane? Padden Fane.
He's not technically one of the good characters. But...
He's very hateable. He's pretty despicable.
Moash is pretty despicable, but I don't know that he's my least favorite.
Cool. This one is from Emma Nilsson Esplin. She says, do you have different expectation going into Brandon's books compared to other authors because he is your husband, or do you try and read them as if you don't personally know the author?
That's kind of a hard one. I think in some ways I have higher expectations. Luckily he meets them. But in some ways I kind of feel like I get surprised just like any other reader. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know he put this in here, and where was I when he was writing this? And this is fun, and this is amazing. And there's a lot that I don't see because I read the finished product just like everyone else, or the almost finished product in the case of writing group.
Or, and sometimes in the case of writing group, a very far from finished product.
Yes.
Depends on where we are in the process.
Your first drafts are pretty clean, all things considered. You have to remember, I used to teach middle school and read middle schoolers' writing, so.
What did you think of Joel's story?
It was awesome. He did a really good job. It was fun.
I told them about the Adventures of Super Dodo story that Joel wrote with me as his scribe.
Yes, he enjoyed that.
He dictated. He cheated.
I think that's good though. Otherwise, he would never have written it.
So another question for both of you. They want to know if there is a character based off of Emily.
Not really. she asked me not to put her in the books like as a cameo sort of thing. Some of my friends are in the books as cameos and whatnot, and some are in the books as more than cameos. Like Scar is based off of my friend Scar. Scar from Bridge 4.
And in that case, you know, he looks like him and he acts like him.
Because Scar's one of the few people I know who's in the military. So I'm like, I'm going to use you as a character because you act like a military person, and I think that's a good thing. He's like, yeah, I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah.
Most of them are just cameos and things like that.
In most cases, when Brandon puts someone in a book, it's not the whole person, it's a character trait or a physical trait or a personality trait or something like that. And I can see, sometimes I'll see characters who say things that I've said. One time,
Syl says I'm intelligent and articulate.
Yes, Syl says I'm
intelligent. That came from when you were 3?
That's a quote from when I was 3, and my dad taught me to say, no, I was younger than that. I was like 18 months old, and I could speak really clearly, and he taught me to say, I am intelligent and articulate.
Yep.
And Brandon heard that story from my dad and put that in.
Yep. The character that I would say that owes the most to Emily, even though it's not based on Emily, is Navani. Because being able to, you know, have a wonderful wife has helped me to write a wonderful wife. They're very different people, but there's definitely some...
I can relate with Navani in a lot of ways, in certain roles that she has.
The prologue to this new book is Navani, and it owes some very specific things to Emily. So
that's kind of fun to see.
Emily, how did he convince you to use a sword to cut your wedding cake?
Oh, it didn't take much convincing. The story of that was he told me that he wanted to get swords for his groomsmen.
I've been saying for years I was going to do this, and no one believed me. So I'm like, all right.
So he really did, and then I was like, well, I want a sword. And he said, you have a ring, you don't get a sword. And I was like, okay, fine. But then he came over one time and was like, look, my sword came in the mail. And showed me this sword. And I was like, that's kind of a girly sword, you know? It had a kind of intricate, what do you call the basket. And he's like, no, just kidding, this one's yours. So he gave me a sword for our wedding too. And my roommate at the time, she and I had a great time stabbing things with the sword, slicing stuff and, you know, figuring out how to use it. So when he said we were going to cut our wedding cake with a sword, I was like, okay, yours or mine.
That's got to be the nerdiest thing you've done, right?
That was pretty nerdy.
That's a level beyond...
beyond giving someone dice?
Yeah, beyond giving someone dice is, you know, having swords at your wedding.
It was pretty fun, though.
Yes, it was very fun.
And it kind of started a tradition in your family. So.
My brother cut his wedding cake with a battle axe. One of mine, I might add.
The Gemmel.
The Gemmel. He used the Gemmel
He
award.
used the Gemmel
Yeah. What did you guys do?
We used the spear.
You used the spear. That's right. Yeah.
And Lauren did a sword too.
Yeah. Now Lauren didn't need much convincing either. She's the person who, when she was a teenager, went to Lord of the Rings 23 times in the theater.
And I think she cut her wedding cake with the Lord of the Rings replica sword.
I think it was Sting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So now it's totally a thing.
Yeah.
Great family tradition. Are there any areas of your personal lives or your marriage that are off limits for Brandon to reference or use in his books?
There have been times where I say, I'm going to put that in. You're like, no, you're not. But I won't tell you what they were.
That is true. For the most part, he's pretty careful.
You have to be careful, just like I was talking earlier about using real-world cultures. You have to be careful with using real-world people, because what you're looking for is not to actually use the person, except in the case of Scar, who just was perfect and got dropped in. Most of the time what you're looking for is some aspect of them that's interesting and unique to them, and by taking that, you can do that in an offensive way, right? Take something that is unique to that person and kind of exploit it. Or you can let that their challenges inspire you, and you can learn about that kind of challenges and accurately try to reflect someone who is similar but not that person and their challenges. And when you do that right, when someone reads the book, they say, wow, it's like me, rather than being offended, it's very much the someone gets it. Someone's trying to get it at least.
Well, and I think
yeah.
good authors are able to choose a real experience, either theirs or someone else's, and give it to their characters in a way that isn't completely obvious where it came from, you know?
Yeah.
So that it kind of inspires the book, but I think very few people would be able to point to something in your book and say, that came from your personal life. I could, but I don't necessarily mind that it's in there because it's well disguised, I guess. Does that make sense?
Next time we should have Jane or Jordo on the stream to talk about embarrassing stories of Brandon when he was a kid.
That would be awesome. Now, who we need is your mother.
Oh,
That
my
would be a
mother.
panel at the release party.
Man. What's that?
That could be a fun panel at the release party.
Don't get Win on
That's
here.
true.
Brandon, the Sanderson
Yeah, if
family.
we got your dad, we'd be in trouble.
Oh, my dad. My dad's stories become tall tales very quickly, and I definitely
Good.
inherited part of that from him.
Yep.
They want to know what your favorite cuisine is and if it would fit into any of the any of Brandon's worlds. I have
My favorite cuisine? I love Mexican food. I love, like, what I call toxic Mexican. I love fast food Mexican. I don't know if there's anything really in
Yeah, there's not really
anything that's in Mexican food inspired.
Nope.
It could, probably, honestly, the best place would be Herdasians in Stormlight, but
Right.
they're not really. I mean, they're not that close to Hispanic culture. I think their food is very different.
The food is very different, and for instance, there's just a few aspects that I use, but yeah. The food actually I'm doing in Stormlight is more based off of early 20th century American street food and the change to mobile cuisine. It's one of those fascinating things you can read about, and that's where the food like chowta is coming from and stuff. Is this idea of as cultures intermix and as sort of industrial revolution stuff starts to happen, food starts to need to be portable, and I like that idea.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think that you're getting better at is adding more details like that. You know, food and clothing and cultural things. And
This one is about gone. So that's 2 we've done today. I've got another one because we stole them from Jello and gave him the pens without.
So this one's from Corinne Kumar. It's a great book name, by the way. What does a day as a business manager for Dragonsteel Entertainment look like for you? And what does the company manage compared to what Tor Books does?
Oh, that's kind of an interesting one. Now we've kind of my job has evolved as we've hired more people because we kind of, you know, at the very beginning I was helping Brandon answer fan mail, and then we realized quickly that was a very bad idea because if anyone ever said anything the least bit, you know, derogatory about anything, I would get mad and want to burn down their house and feel depressed for the whole day. So we quickly moved from that. What I do now is mostly make sure that our team has the resources that they need. I'm kind of the HR director. I'm kind of, you know, in some ways the publicist. I tell people that my job is to say no. Because Brandon would say yes to every invitation that he gets, and then he wouldn't be able to write any books. So all of the requests for Brandon's time come through me, and I decide if I'm willing to let him give that time, which has worked out pretty well actually. And I try to, you know, do that in a way of trying to be fair and making sure that he's spending time in different types of things and that lots of people get a chance to interact with him. But other than that, we have, what do we have now? 14 people on payroll, I think. Not all full time, but my job is to make sure they have the resources they need to do their job. So if someone needs something, then they come to me and I try and get it for them.
And what we do that's like, how does this compare to what Tor does?
Yeah.
Is we are kind of like Tor in microcosm, right? Tor will have a team of publicists and a team of marketing people. And the marketing people... we have Adam to do both of that. Hi, Adam. Good job. They will have a whole art department, right? not a lot of illustrators, mostly people to interact with illustrators. And we have one person to do that, right? One thing we do differently is Tor doesn't do direct sales. They just have people who sell to bookstores. And we do direct sales. So a lot of our team, like Mem, whose hands you might have seen at various points in this. Mem is in charge of our warehouse, which we are sitting in right now. And Michael and Joe are work in the warehouse, and you've seen their hands. And we ship out all these books to people who order them through my website.
So we do, we're kind of a little mini publishing company in some ways, but Tor takes care of the distribution over the whole. Yeah,
of all the everything but the leatherbounds. How long were we at, Adam?
We're at 3 hours.
3 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. I got a little bit more in me, but I don't know about you guys.
I'm sitting down. I'm easy.
Yeah, we'll go a little bit longer. How many of these have we done?
Maybe 1,000.
5 pages? 5 piles?
Five piles?
6, 7, 8. I think you're on either 8 or 9.
8 or 9, and we had how many to start?
37.
37. So we are 1/4 of the way through what we need to do before the 25th.
Yeah. So maybe we'll be doing more of these.
We will probably be doing another one of these. And
I'm going to go back to the kids. Like I said, I bribed them with screen time so they wouldn't cause problems. But
so we'll go for another half hour here, and then we will wrap it up. But then we will be back to do several more of these. I'll have to get some of these at nighttime signings, but we'll do another of these sessions at least.
Okay.
Bye, Emily.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
Jonathan Lewandowski wants to know if you've do you dream about having any of the magic systems you've created?
It happens once in a while, not as often as you would think, but it does happen once in a while. And it does happen that once in a while I have a dream, and I'm like, that would be a great magic system. It never is. Right? An hour later, you're like, why, when I woke up, did I think that was a great idea? But, yeah, that has happened as well. None of them have made it into books, so.
Seth Hell wants to know what color magic decks would some of your characters play?
Boy, it's going to depend on the character, right? I often say, for instance, I feel like Kelsier is black-blue. I feel that Vin is red-green, probably. And Sazed is about as mono-white as you get. Yeah, it's going to depend on the characters. Kaladin, pretty mono-white, though some of his powers are blue-based, so you could make a very good argument for. That's the thing in Magic, is like, you have both personality and power suites of characters influencing what colors they do and what they would play. And so you get Kaladin, where personality whites, power set blue would be pretty common, and Dalinar is going to be mono red for most of his life, moving slowly into white red, and then you'll get someone like Yasmin, who's very mono blue with some touches of black, or Shalon, who's also just mono red. So, yeah.
A few people have wondered if we're ever going to see time travel in the Cosmere.
So time travel into the past is something that I decided very early in the life of the Cosmere that I was not going to deal with. So people can time travel in the future, but we can do that right now. Not very much, but if you go fast, you are time traveling into the future by laws of relativity. Easier to do that in the Cosmere. There are a couple things for storytelling that really throw a lot of wrenches into your world building. One of them is time travel, right? As soon as you introduce time travel, it changes everything. Another one is bringing characters back from the dead. And since my very first Cosmere book starts with someone being resurrected in Chapter 1, I knew that people coming back from the dead was not something I could have a hard, fast rule against in the Cosmere. Multiple books are based on the idea of people being resurrected. That's like, you know, where Warbreaker and Elantris both come from, is that kind of idea. And so since I knew I was going to be doing that one, the other two that I think that really mess with things in strange ways are alternate dimensions and time travel. And that's why I just said I'm going to put those both off limits on the Cosmere. You saw me doing alternate dimension stuff in Steelheart, in part because I won't let myself do it in the Cosmere. I'm already playing with fire with the number of the way that people can become cognitive shadows in the Cosmere, and I don't want to have the other two messing up narratives and storylines and things on the level that they would. So no time travel into the past ever in the Cosmere.
Parker Blount wants to know, what is the fastest and slowest you have ever written a book?
Fastest is probably Alcatraz 1. It's only 50,000 words, so, you know. But I wrote that one in like 15, 16 days, something like that. This was before I knew Emily. My girlfriend at the time was on vacation, and I had just finished a book, and I needed a break. And so I wrote this wacky, goofy thing that I didn't outline, and I just kind of discovery wrote because I wanted to practice doing that. That is probably the fastest, though. Skyward is up there, right? Like, if you look at actual raw writing days, Skyward took about 3 months, but I was on tour for part of that. And the reason Skyward had to be written so quickly is that's when I pulled Apocalypse Guard for not working, and the publisher was understandably upset, and I promised them, I will get you a replacement book, and you can still publish it next year. And they're like, it's like, you know, October, or whatever. How are you going to have a book to us? You need to have it to us by January. And I'm like, all right, here we go. And I wrote that book. Fortunately, I had an outline ready to go, and I was quite pleased with how the book was looking. The only thing that I hadn't figured out yet was Spin's character, Spencer, and that took some work. That's why there's 3 different first chapters to Skyward, 2 failed ones and a final one, as I was trying to find how to write Spencer.
Would you ever consider writing a novel in one sitting? Or a novella?
A novella or a novel. You know, like you see my marathon write I did earlier where I got, what was it? We got 19,000 words. So I could theoretically write a novella in one sitting, but I'm not sure that it actually would happen. I could try it. I don't know if the payoff would be worth it. Like, I was able to do that in part because I knew it was going to wipe me out for a few days, but those few days were all holidays, and I wasn't planning on working anyway, and so I front-loaded that, but I got nothing done the rest of that week. Right? You do a 13-hour writing session. The other reason I was able to do that is because it was the end of a book, which by then, the outlines had all snapped very much into place. I knew exactly what was happening in every scene. I knew exactly the emotional reaction of every character in every scene, because I'd been working on the book for almost a year at that point, longer if you count how long the outlining process was, and I knew exactly what was going to happen, so it was, you'll talk, other authors have this at the end of books, it's less writing and more typing at that point. I couldn't do that with a novella unless I had spent several days ahead of time, or longer, coming up with an intrigued outline. And then it's not really writing the book in one sitting, truly, to be honest. It's typing the book in one sitting, and since I can type, you know, at like 100 words a minute or whatever I type at, then typing a book in one sitting, or at least a novella, is not necessarily difficult. But
Grant Willis wants to know, are there any clues or Easter eggs in the Roshar/Cosmere that have not been discovered yet?
Yeah, but they're not ones that you should be able to discover. They'll just be things that you'll be able to look back at. We embed some things here and there in the art, like the last plaque that was foreshadowed in like the margins of one of the art pieces in the first book, with someone catching a sharp blade. And there's stuff like that. A lot of the little little circles for characters at the start of stories represent things that'll happen much later in the series. But most of them are intentionally zoomed in of what the shot would be, so that you can't tell right now, because you know, these are not things that you're supposed to be able to figure out. Most things that I intended for you to figure out, you did, and some that I didn't intend you to figure out, you also did. So people can feel very proud of that. But I wouldn't say that there. I mean, yes, there are a bunch of Easter eggs. There are a ton of them, but there's no way you can figure out what they are. So.
Bruno Santos says, of all your books, which cover is your favorite?
The cover of the original Way of Kings, just because of the meaning Michael Whalen's pictures and paintings have in my life, and the just the fact that I got a Whalen cover and that it is so iconic for me for Way of Kings and things like that. Like, we are doing a repackage now of the Mistborn books. The repackage just came out. It's going to be hard to ever do that with Stormlight, just because that first cover is so iconic and such a favorite of mine. It's interesting that both Elantris and Warbreaker's covers have kind of become iconic as well, in that there's never been conversation about changing those. But for whatever reason, Mistborn, we change all the time. Like, I doubt this is the last repackage we'll do. We probably, every few years, we get new covers for Mistborn, and something about Mistborn lends itself well to us doing that. Maybe it's because we did it once already by moving from hardcover to paperback. We changed the art style between those two. Maybe that's we're just used to it, but yeah.
Landon Mesky says, if there's one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring author, what would it be?
The same one that most authors give you, I'm afraid, so you've probably heard it before. It is practice. I often say, learn to treat yourself as the product of your writing time, not the story as the product of your writing time. Meaning, if you spend your time practicing with the intent of turning yourself into a better writer, then you are not going to fail at writing for that period, even if the story you write doesn't end up selling. No story you write is a failure. Everything is about turning you into a better writer. And if you can take that kind of long-term view of it and look at each of the stories that you write during that time as kind of a byproduct of making yourself a better writer, then sometimes you're able to let the story be a little less precious. You can see its flaws a little better. You're more willing to revise it, and you're more willing to try new and different things if that's the case. If you are looking at what's going to make me a better writer rather than what's going to make the story that I'm going to sell that's going to make me millions of dollars.
Katie Gursky says, earlier you have stated that Spence's story in Skyward was inspired by The Boy and His Dragon stories that you read in your teens. Mm-hmm. And I guess if this is spoilery, we won't answer, but it says, is Risen and Cheery Cheery's story in Stormlight 4 at all based upon this plot archetype as well?
Yes, but only in small, minor ways. But yes, getting the gift of a strange and unusual pet is one of those things that, ever since, like, I read Dragon's Blood by Jane Yolen, who I mentioned earlier on this stream, is one of those things ever since I read, The White Dragon and Jackson getting his dragon. There's something in me that loves this sort of fantastical pet. I mean, I own a macaw. That's as as pets that it is responsible to have go. Excluding things like getting a lion. It's one of the weirdest things that you can get as a pet, and that's because that's going back to that love of dragon stories, right? Like, that's why I bought Hawk, my lovebird, that was my buddy all through high school, is because a flying, talking little creature just feels so fantasy to me. So yeah, definitely Cheery Cheery is playing into that trope to an extent.
Sarah Plummer wants to know how you came up with the idea for a bead ocean.
For what?
A bead ocean.
Oh, the bead ocean? I honestly have no idea where the bead ocean came from. It's one of those images that grew out of building the world for Stormlight, and it just, I hit upon it and I just went with it, and it worked. It wasn't directly inspired by anything specific that I can think of. Maybe there is something out there. Maybe you'll find some, journal entry for me as a kid being like, I went to the ball pit and it was awesome, but what if they were glass? But yeah.
And I'll get you another question. So.
Mm-hmm. Kara's gonna be so happy we did this, but also annoyed that we only got through a fourth of them. So.
Blake Bauza says, do you ever need a reminder of what your own magic systems can do, or is it all laid out pretty perfectly in your mind?
No, I need reminders on the kind of subtle things, mostly terminology and what decisions I made. Because in a book, sometimes you'll make decisions on the fly where you're like, I think this isn't working. I'm going to change it to this. Or things like that. Like, I still forget that I swapped tin for silver, right? And I still forget exactly what terminology I came up for Zeph using the lashings, and some stuff like that. And I also sometimes need hey, does this feel like it works for the magic system? Because the further we get in the Cosmere, the less simple the rules are, and the more complicated, and like real-world physics, where you kind of have to you're building things that work like complicated engineering devices, right? Like building some of the ways that Magic is working on Scadrial, with the mechanical elements and the medallions and stuff like that, is getting really complicated. And I had to write it out, and I have to go back and reference that. Because yes, I can remember what metal does what and what the rules are here, but the actual how they all interact and come together gets kind of complicated. So, yeah, definitely need reminders on my own magic systems.
This question from Emily Fail, I'm going to edit just slightly. Says, Brandon, what has been your favorite trope to subvert?
Favorite trope to subvert? Boy. What is my favorite trope to subvert? It's gotta be the one that did Mistborn, right? No, you know what? I can't say it. I like subverting my own tropes the best, right? Finding something that I've been leaning on, and recognizing it for what a good thing it's done in my books in the past. Understanding that readers are going to start to expect me to do that more, and then subverting it. Is really fun for me. There's a moment like this at the end of Oathbringer that I won't mention because it's a spoiler, where something that has happened in the previous two books does not happen in this book. And that is intentionally when I was building the outlines for the series, I'm like, hey, I'm leaning on this idea a lot. It is a central theme of the Stormlight, so it's okay, but I need to subvert it a couple times, otherwise it'll get stale. So that one, but if there's one I can talk about, it's the hero's journey, right? Subverting the hero's journey. In ways that are still satisfying, because it's easy to subvert a trope and make it unsatisfying. Most tropes work because they are satisfying to one extent, and so the subversion has to still be satisfying in its own way, and that can get tricky.
Bob Solberger says, if you were to write an 11th Stormlight Archive book, whose backstory would you explore?
Oh, wow, what a great question. Maybe Navani. There might be enough there. It would either be her or be one of the other heralds. Would be my guess.
Ari Nesselbaum says, what are some good strategies for an author who wants to create a very realized setting, but through the eyes of a not too observant main character?
Oh wow, what an intriguing question. Well, I will send you to Sanderson's Laws to read those, because that's kind of the basis for how I build these things. But for a non-observant main character, you got a couple of options. I love the idea. So first trick you can do is you have to establish to the reader that the character isn't observant. And you can do this through lots of different ways. It can be a wink at the reader, right? Like Robert Jordan, when he would write Matt's viewpoint, was winking at the reader. Because Matt would say something that is obviously not true. But you 100% believe that Matt believes that. And there's a wink there, where it's exaggerated to the point and highlighted to the point that you know that the author is saying, hey, this is actually the opposite of what this character thinks. The other way, which Robert Jordan also uses, is by having multiple viewpoints and showing the contrast, right? If you up front can show the reader something that's pretty trustworthy, and then have your viewpoint character say something that is obviously untrue, it can establish that this character is not observant, and then you can play off of that by having the character notice things, and having him or her, the main character, noticing things become the shorthand for you that it's obviously not this, so therefore it should be this other thing. Like the wonderful example of that in The Wheel of Time, one of my favorites, is that Matt has this orphan kid he's pseudo-adopted, right? And this orphan kid starts picking up a lot of Matt's bad habits and mannerisms. Matt is incapable of recognizing that he is the one causing this kid, and so he keeps wondering which of the other guys in the troupe is teaching the kid these bad habits, and keeps focusing on it, and each time he mentions it, your smile gets bigger, because you can easily see externally that this kid is just picking up on all the bad stuff that Matt does that Matt doesn't recognize that he does. And it's brilliant. It's wonderful. It makes you more fond of Matt. It's dangerous because this can make you less fond of someone, but if you do it right, it'll make you more fond of them. And it tells you, oh, I've got to take the things that Matt says with a grain of salt. That's kind of fun. It puts me on my toes when I'm reading his viewpoints. So Robert Jordan was really good at this. You can go read some of those things, but hopefully that sends you in the right direction.
Muhammad Zaid Mustafa asks, what comes first, the magic system or the plot? And they are specifically wondering regarding the Stormlight Archive.
Okay, so with Stormlight, character came first, actually, but it's different for every book. What I'm generally doing is I'm writing down all the interesting ideas I have in a file these days. It used to be a notebook. Of just ideas I want to use. And I write them down, and I periodically go back to that to remind myself of the interesting ideas I've had. And they just kind of hover in there until they start combining in interesting ways. And it's when ideas combine that I really like where things are going, right? Like when the two ideas separately are interesting, but together are more interesting, I know I've got a book, or at least a novella growing out of that. With Stormlight, the very first idea I can trace is the idea of a person's, the brother of the king, after the king gets assassinated, and the strange place that could put the brother in when the nephew who inherits is a bad king, and the brother has to decide between duty to country and duty to family, right? Do I unseat my lawfully appointed now king and nephew whom I love because he is a bad king and it's bad for the kingdom, or do I instead hold myself back and not try to do that? Now, in the original Dragonsteel that I wrote when I was in high school, it wasn't as nuanced as that. The king who ascended was a child, and the character of Dowler had to decide, do I step in and become regent? And it's way less interesting because, yes, you just do, right? This is the thing that happened all the time in history. And then you train the kid to be good, and when they're of age, you let them take over. That's easy. But what about if the son is a bad king, doesn't know it, and is unwilling to do what you advise them to do to become a good king? Suddenly you're in this situation where you, for the good of the kingdom, should be staging a coup, but you don't want to because you love your brother and your nephew. And that was the first idea for Stormlight. Now, the second idea that shaped Stormlight was the High Storms. So in that case, it was the world building that it grew out of. And then the third idea was the idea of knights, or of the heralds returning and everyone having forgotten who they were and not believing them. This is kind of inspired by Pern. That was how the first draft of Way of Kings happened in 2002. I'm going to release that to people this summer during the Kickstarter for this actual thing. So you'll be able to get a copy of that then. And in that one of the major things is Taln, the Herald, has come back, but no one really believes him. His powers don't work, and he has to ask himself if maybe he is wrong, if he's not a herald, if he's just and that's like a major theme in the book. So, yeah.
Excellent. Scott Maddock asks, excluding the Wheel of Time, what has been the most emotionally difficult scene for you to write? Which is a hard question to answer to avoiding spoilers.
It is hard to do avoiding spoilers. Mostly, I would probably point at the climaxes of the 3 Stormlight books. Because I've spent so long working on this series and so long planning it, and been so excited to finally be able to write it and have it come together, I would say those are probably the most emotional that I get over books. And it's partially having it finally happen, right? Like, I'm not necessarily one who gets too sad over the fates of my characters and things, because for me, it's almost like, because I've been working on these so long, it's almost like history that I'm chronicling that no one else knows yet, rather than, because I'm not a discovery writer, rather than, discovering and finding out and being surprised and saddened and excited for the characters. There is a little bit of that still. But more, it's like I finally get to do this. Once in a while, there's a scene that is painful to write because of what's happening to the characters.
Another question from Ari Nesselbaum is, what is something you fought very hard to keep in one of your books that you later regretted?
Oh, I was really wanting the Ways sequence that ended up in the charity anthology for A Memory of Light to be in the final book. I thought it belonged there. I thought it was much better than the shorthand we did. When Harriet said we're going to cut Theo, I was okay with that. I'm like, you know what? This is a really weird sequence. It's an odd sequence to add in the last book. I can totally understand why this doesn't belong. But the parent sequence, I was like, no, we need this. And I fought for it, and I went to bat for it, and it got cut. Last year, I went back to it to do a revision to put it in the charity anthology, and I found it was really mediocre. And I got it to the point where it now feels like I remembered how good it was, but it took way more work than I was anticipating to get it there. And it wasn't that I wasn't willing to admit that it had problems back in the day, but I was believing I could take the time and fix it, and Harriet was saying, we don't have the time to fix it, and we don't need it. And it turns out Harriet was right. It took way longer for me to fix, would have delayed the book, perhaps too much for me to fix, and at the end of the day, it wasn't necessary for the book. And I got to do a really good draft of it and release it for everyone in Unfettered, so you can read it good rather than rushed, as it probably would have been before. And so it actually turned out better for the sequence anyway. So, yeah. We have to write a blog post on that. Remind me, Jason wrote me and said he says it does make the Wheel of Time eligible for the Hugos for Best Series for this year, because a new entry, even though it was a novella, that was cut from the last book came out last year. It does make it, so we have to make sure people know about that. But that one was hard to cut, and I fought for it. One that ended up in the books that I probably regret the most is in the second Stormlight book. There's a scene, and I won't say the character for spoilers, but there's a character who dies, and the character dies and then isn't actually dead, right? And in the original draft that I submitted to people, everyone's like, "Oh, this character's not dead." Very obviously, right? You make it very clear, and I'm like, I don't want you to know that they're not dead. I'm going to work really hard to convince you, and I rewrote the scene to be really convincing, which was the wrong move, actually. The scene should have just let people understand that the character wasn't dead, because there was no advantage to the story in you actually believing that, because the character was just coming back at the end of the story, and the reason the character had to leave was for other narrative reasons, and it wasn't coming down to me convincing you You know, it was better for the story if you could just be like, oh yeah, I believe that character's coming back. That's going to be interesting when it happens, and anticipate that and be excited for it, rather than being heartbroken and then just kind of having them show up again. It just feels like too much of a gotcha, too much of a fake out. So.
And that's 30.
That's 30 minutes. All right, guys. I am going to go ahead and shut this one down. Thank you to everybody who listened. Let us know if you like these things. And if you want us to do more stuff like this in the future, I will try to make time for it. Make sure you guys thank my team in the comments because they have all been hanging out and helping. And we will probably do this again very soon because I have thousands more of these to sign.